control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all connected but separated, misunderstood and so frustrated. A million armies of one have invaded, watching you and watching me. We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong. I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere. Watching me. The little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. We the people have taken over. We the people are little brother, standing by to dethrone each other, watching you and watching me. Paranoid, the lens is our weapon, desensitized in our lust for attention, democratized by our voyeur obsessions, watching you and watching me. So lives to perfection, don't let them project you as you are. Feel your every flaw. I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Stay in line, don't make a mistake. We're watching. We watched you for so long. We wait for you to fall. We will expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me.
Let your experience begin right now. From high atop the mountains of British Columbia to you listening around the world, this is Spaced Out Radio. You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, on Twitter, @SpacedOutRadio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. You can follow us on Instagram, Dave Scott, SOR, or on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show.
Superman, that we're the only ones who can be strong, but we break on command, cause women rule the world.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride as we are live on Spaced Out Radio.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Said the deeper I go, the deeper I fall.
Good evening and welcome to Spaced Out Radio. Tonight I am your host, Dave Scott, and it's good to have you along for the ride as once again we are on live broadcasting on this great planet we call Earth. We are live right now, right here in Uncle Jimbo's cabin, right here in the Great White North, as we continue the tradition of the mighty SOR. And this is live on Thursday night, early Friday morning. If you're on the East Coast, if you're in the United States, I hope you had a very, very good Thanksgiving dinner, because you're going to need it for tonight. Tonight's a power show on this network. Let's welcome in everyone listening in on spacedoutradio.com, on Spreaker, on the United Public Talk Radio Network, the High Plains Talk Radio Network, and on Revolution Radio, as we do this thing every night of the week. And we rock in and out of every show thanks to our resident guitar god, Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal, formerly of Guns N' Roses. Yes, Bumblefoot is the official sound of SOR. If you want to follow me on social media, you can do so on Twitter, @SpacedOutRadio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, I can be followed at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download our show from iTunes. And, of course, our website is spacedoutradio.com. If you want to take part in this show, because we don't take callers, you have to sign into one of the special chat rooms on Revolution Radio, on Spreaker, on the UPRN chat room, and on Facebook at the SOR Space Travelers Club. And if you haven't signed up for the SOR Space Travelers Club yet, you have until tomorrow at 9 o'clock to do so. So just less than 12 hours from now, because it's only $5 a month, and with that your name gets entered into monthly prize draws. We want you to get access to that. You get access to private group interviews, access to a special section on our website, and more. Hey, we're going to give you a hell of a lot more than just access to our archives. Well, on our website you can read up on my latest blog, check out Eric Markham's SOR Spacewire for your latest and weird news, and if you've had an experience or a sighting you can't explain, just head to our website, fill out a Sightlines report. Our researcher Mike Schmidt is ready to find out what's going on. All your personal information is 100% confidential. We want to thank everyone listening in on the United Public Talk Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans, and their listeners from 160 countries around the world. Thank you for inviting us into your home, your car, wherever you may be listening. And remember, if you're listening on Revolution Radio, the Double R Machine is ready for you. We got to take the donations. Take the time to visit freedomslips.com and donate today. Tonight, I want you to look up at the stars. And there's a reason for this. Well, as long as it's not cloudy out like at my place right now, because you might have troubles then. But can you sit there staring up at the stars and think that we have traveled way up and beyond? Tonight's guest, Randy Cramer, will make you think and make you wonder. You see, Randy, otherwise known as Capt Kaye, is a military project. We've talked super soldiers on this show before with Laurie and Fenton and others. And if you've never heard Randy's story, be prepared to be amazed and in awe. Randy is the most public figure in the world of conspiracy, in my opinion, when it comes to government black ops. He is a retired Marine. He spent 2 decades of his life serving the United States Marine Corps. But his hot spots weren't Afghanistan or Iraq or anywhere in the Middle East. They were on Mars. Yeah, take that. So, for those out there who believe that we haven't visited the Red Planet yet, Randy's going to make you think again. His stories and knowledge will sound outlandish and so sci-fi, many of you will think there is no bloody way in hell that he's not reading a movie script. But it's factual and truthful. Randy has died, come back, age regressed, and his brain has been tampered with to suppress the memories of his military service. 17 years away from Earth is one hell of a long tour of duty. From fighting with and against aliens to the colonization of Mars, how we got there, what space is like. We are likely going to have the most impactful 3 hours on Spaced Out Radio that we've ever had. And on that note, we welcome Capt Kaye into Spaced Out Radio land. How are you?
I'm good. How you doing, Dave?
I am good. And you know what? I checked with certain people, my guides, everything. We're not being dismantled tonight. Because when I had you on the show exactly 1 year, 1 month, and 5 days ago, we actually, 21 minutes into the broadcast, got hacked to the point where I had to shut the show down. And you were laughing on the other side of it, because when I called you on the phone, I'm brand new to this show. I'm all embarrassed because I'm trying to make a name for myself, and this crap happened. And you were laughing, and you're like, Dave, I've been on 14 interviews. This is the 6th time I've been hacked. Don't worry about it. And you made me feel so at ease with that. And I've wanted to state publicly to you that that moment when you said that meant so much to me, Randy, because I was so embarrassed and really thought that this may be the beginning and the end of SOR. But 2 years later, here we are.
Well, you're very welcome, and I understand that being your first go, that must have felt pretty awkward. But yeah, I was batting about 50% with, trying to do an interview or show with someone and have it go wonky because somebody interfered electronically or on my end or their end and screwed with it. So it was just par for the course for me at the time. So I'm glad I could say, don't worry about it. This happens all the time, because it has happened less and less, but certainly in the early days, it was about 50-50 that a show was going to go up or down.
Well, that's interesting. Why do you think it's happened less and less?
Some because our people are getting better at the sort of counter, sort of measures. And I think some of it is also a little less active action towards me, because some people, to be quite frank, are busy doing other stuff. I'm low on the inbox, to be honest with you, compared to what probably some people have to deal with all day. So I think maybe in the early days, some people maybe had more time to deal with me, and I think maybe now they have some less time. And I would also suggest that we have made more friends internally throughout the military intelligence community since I have started speaking. So we have less people to hate on me and people who have other priorities, and our people are getting better at countermeasures. So that's the 3 reasons I could think of.
Hey, let me ask you, because a lot of people who have questioned who you are and your true accounts of what you've done in your military service, you have permission to speak about these topics. Why were you given permission?
From my understanding, the process was that the command staff decided somebody was, going to get picked to be a public spokesperson. And so there was apparently a short list of officers which was generated, and from that short list, a whittling away and weeding out process, and then it came down apparently, and I ended up getting the short straw, as it were, really. So just somehow I ended up on a list of choosy chooses, and then it got whittled down, and I got to be the choice. And then someone asked me, and I said, yeah. that's really just kind of how it worked.
Well, I'm curious, though, did you like the burden of being a whistleblower on the secret space program? Because that's technically what you are.
Well, technically yes and technically no. Technically not a whistleblower because I'm not acting against the wishes of my superiors. I have the absolute sanction and permission of my superiors. My brigadier general and I actually do a lot of discussing about what my rights and responsibilities under United States Marine Corps Special Section Special Code of Conduct guidelines are. So we discuss a lot about what the legal parameters for what I'm doing and how I act and other parts of my job that I do and so forth. So I'm quite assured, based on those conversations I've had with him, that we are fully well understanding what our legal ability is, what our legal powers here are, and I fully understand what I'm legally empowered to say and do in the job that I've been given to do. So I think I understand it pretty well.
So when a lot of people hear your story, and maybe tonight is the first time for a lot of them, Randy, because there's always newbies around. You know, you are someone who spent 17 of your 20-year career on Mars, and I would like to give, before Mars, a brief history on yourself, on how you got to that point.
Well, sure. That's where the story, I mean, it's probably hard enough for some people to accept that, you know, we have a 70-year secret space program that, you know, got to the moon way before we say we did and got to Mars way before we say we did and started building things in both places way before we officially say we did. I realize that can be hard enough for some people, but it is a bit more of a stretch to say where I came from, because in the sort of early to mid-'60s, one of the technologies that the different agencies within the covert military space programs were developing were genetically augmented soldier, aka super soldier programs. So of that sort of era, this is always part of the complicated part of the story, things were going, what I would say, and what United States Marine Corps Special Section investigators and observers would say was going not in a positive direction. Instead of making really, really sophisticated, quote-unquote super soldiers, there was a much more focus on making what I would really refer to, or what we refer to in the report we did on the subject, called murder machines. And there's a difference. There's a distinct difference in how you design, engineer, program, and develop someone to be a super soldier versus a murder machine. And one is obviously imbued with self-thinking ethics, a moral center, you know, and how it goes about its mission and duties and obeys its orders, versus one who just, you know, pulls triggers on command. And how you have to condition human beings and the human mind to do that is a sort of very unfortunate process. You have to sort of break down people a lot, like the murder machines, and so you end up sort of hurting the raw material, as it were, not to sound too cold about it, but when you're thinking about human beings as raw material and you're damaging them in the process, you're not really making the most effective use of them. So we recommended some better usages. So my program came out of a notion of let's have some better usages. So let's start with that I came directly out of the notion that I was going to be designed and built under a augmented soldier, super soldier program under United States Marine Corps Special Section guidelines and auspices. And that means, unlike some other programs where they were taking young children and adapting them, I essentially was engineered from the ground up. So the notion that they were taking raw material from a family line that had genetic material that they were fond of, and knowing that they were taking portion from my biological mother and my biological father, and then tinkering with that in whatever fashion that they felt, you know, would make me sing, as it were, as a super soldier or as an augmented soldier. And then I was gestated and born and then immediately entered into a program and training program as pretty much as an infant and as a toddler. So I know that's where we start to, some people even go farther off, is that we almost immediately, when we were able to develop these technologies, did start some programs to build soldiers from the very ground up. And I was probably one of the first programs where we were just building people genetically from the ground up, chain by chain, and mapping them out and building them.
How did you get chosen for that program? Did you have a choice, or were you genetically modified for that program?
Well, yeah, again, that's the distinction I'm trying to describe here, is that more to the point, families were picked based on their genetic sort of makeup. So my family was picked, meaning my mother and my father were picked based on, because they were a family unit that was making babies, and that they had a potential to make some kind of genetic mix that was favorable to the outcome that they wanted, and that's a long conversation about that criteria. That somehow then they decided, and before I'm ever born, before I'm ever conceived, before I'm ever thought of, they are able to look at that genetic material and say, all right, what do we want to make? And think about how they would bring those two pieces of material together and add all of the material together that they would want to make me. So that's the drawing board process, where I was designed, then constructed, then incubated, then gestated, then born. So I really, truly was built from the ground up. Blueprint, Petri dish, drop, mad scientist laboratory, the whole deal.
How did you find out about that? Because in a way, that had to be a little heartbreaking. I mean, not that we ever think of how we're conceived or anything, Randy, but to find out that you were genetically modified in order to serve a military program and not conceived, let's say, out of love, that had to be difficult.
Yeah, there was an adjustment period, getting that information, sure, and a long adjustment period, years of an adjustment period to be okay with that, and I certainly spent some years going back and forth through what I would refer to as Frankenstein syndrome. Like, am I a man or am I a monster? Was I really just created to be a man or a monster? Is that, what am I? But I feel like I answered those questions through learning everything that I could truly about who I am in myself. And of course, I'm a man, I'm a human being, and I am an augmented human being that was designed a little bit differently, made a little bit differently. But there is nothing about me that makes me somehow robotic or monsterish. There's, I'm as human being, as man as anybody else could be. So those questions I feel have answered. But believe me, when I learned that was where I came from, that was a harsh kind of reality to sort of chew into, and I was not really comfortable with that for a while and wrestled with it for a while. Yeah.
What was it like the first time you found out that you were going to Mars? How did that process take place?
Didn't know I was going there till we got there. So that's probably the shocking part, is that I knew I was going somewhere. When we were going through the process of getting the contract signed and getting the paperwork ready and essentially getting sent out from Lunar Operations Command on the moon, which was maybe a 48-ish hour process or something. I didn't know where I was going, and I was told that I had to sign everything before we could be told where we were going to go, but then we were basically going to get told by the people who were taking us there when we went there, but they didn't tell us until we actually arrived there. So, we left in a very, very large transport ship from the moon and then took a jump gate to Mars, and at that moment was told, on the intercom system by the pilot, welcome to Mars, your new duty station. So at that point, I was like, excuse me, what? Excuse me, where? What? I was, you're with a lot of people being told, to just orderly, if anyone who's been in the military knows how this goes, it's get in line and follow the person in front of you, and don't stand there too long, or the guy behind you is going to step on your shoes. So, you're constantly being moved, and you just move. So in this process, you're just moving and being moved from one place to another, and sitting down where you're being told to sit down, and waiting when you're being told to wait, and then disembarking when you're being told to disembark. But at that moment where you're being told, yeah, welcome to Mars, it's a bit disconcerting. And then coming down the gangplank, which I've talked about this experience, and seeing that we were walking out into open air, onto tarmac, and starting to have concerns like, we don't have spacesuits. Are we okay? Is this all right? And not having any time as you sort of being marched down the gangplank, and all of a sudden you're outside, and there's thin, cool air and sun hitting your face, and you're like, oh, well, I guess we can breathe here. So, but all of that is happening so fast. There's not a lot of time to stand there in any kind of poetic repose and go, let me think about how I really feel about this right now. Because you're just being told to go, 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 do, and you don't really have time until the first time, probably the first time that night that I arrived, the first day that I'm like in my bunk, trying to go to sleep, thinking, what happened? I woke yesterday. I was not on Mars. I was at home, and things were cool. Now I'm here. What? So, yeah, but believe me, the process of also what you're doing there, you're not just standing around with your thumb up your butt. So, I mean, immediately the next morning, that's like get up, eat, training, and you're go, 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 go. And by that, within 48 hours, you're in a new life, and you just adapt to the new life that you're in. So it all happens pretty quickly, but you don't have much choice as a military operative to just adapt and go and do. So you do, but believe me, there are moments where you're just, what now? How did this happen? What am I doing here? But you're with a bunch of other people that are having the same response, and you all just kind of like, well, here we are. Okay, here we go.
I want to go back.
So much for what everybody else told us.
I want to go back just a couple of seconds, because you said you took a jump room or a jump ship from the moon. So how did you get to the moon? Like, were you at a military installation in the United States or a special covert op building somewhere, and then you made the jump? Like, explain how that happened. Sure.
No. The journey from, where I was sleeping in my bed and I got picked up is two guys, jump gate technicians, come through, jump gate into my bedroom. I get taken through that jump gate to a local station here on Earth, where we then board about, I want to say 35, less than 40 of us boarded a TR-3B, which is a black triangle ship. That took off from the American Southwest, headed for the moon. That took about 90 minutes. We got to the moon, and then what proceeded to be, again, about maybe a 48-hour period of processing of a medical exam, a contract signing. We hurry up and wait, and then we boarded a very large transport ship, which was several thousand people. I'm sure it was several stories high. And that ship took off from the moon and then created its own jump gate, or a jump gate was created for it. And then it traveled via jump gate to Mars orbit and then landed on Mars on the tarmac. And that trip, so the TR-3B trip's about a 90-minute trip, and the transport ship from the moon to Mars was like maybe 15 or 20 minutes.
This
Very
is
fast.
Randy, this is so out of a sci-fi movie that we just, as most humans, cannot conceptualize what you have gone through to get from the moon to Mars within minutes. We look at that as a couple years away in our current space travel that we know of. How hard, when you were going through this process, when you take the Black Triangle TR-3B to the moon, that had to be trippy in itself. But then to hop on this commuter ship, thank God it's not on a milk run like most bus services, it had to be absolutely mind-tearing trying to put all of this together, wondering if this is really reality.
Well, a trip to the moon was no big deal. I'd done that before. So for training purposes and for years, before I was deployed, my training period was lots of trips back into different bases and trips back and forth to the moon. So a trip to the moon was not so out of the ordinary. So being told that we were, being put on a TR-3B, that we were going to a session on the moon, or that we were headed to the moon, we were going to LOC, that was no big surprise. That was no big deal by that time. That had happened enough times. But getting there and then finally realizing, this is process, we're actually getting sent somewhere. That's the conclusion of a series of events. You know, you're being trained to go somewhere. You're not just going to be trained forever. So at some point, you know, you're going to get deployed to something. And at that point, when it's finally time to get deployed. Okay, cool. Where are we going? Well, we're not going to tell you until you're time to go, or you're there. Well, okay, fine. So all of that knew that was going to happen. Some of the specific details, maybe I didn't really know what were going to happen, but just the notion that it was all quite to be expected given the years of training experience that I had come to expect, none of that was a surprise at all. So in context, all of that makes it more digestible, right? The fact that I knew where I was and what was going on, and that, you know, this was all sort of very supposed to happen. Just I didn't know exactly where we were going, you know, or what the destination where I was headed was going to be, and that was a surprise. And then the ship that we took, that was different than anything I'd ever been on. But again, this is all in the context of being part of a covert military space program, so that's not a total surprise. You know, taking a ship that takes a jump gate, that, again, I've taken jump gates before, so that's not a surprise. The ship takes a jump gate, that's not a total surprise, just because none of these things are necessarily things that have happened before. They're in a context which is not shocking. Surprising sometimes and like, what? But not just so shocking, like, what? Wait a minute, I was supposed to be pushing a broom today, when, you know, there is this whole other programmed knowledge within me as part of goes with the training and the experience of the training, that I know what's going on, I know what's happening, so that's not a surprise or a shock.
Absolutely. And what did it feel like in that travel? Because none of us listening to this show, unless they are part of or privy to some government operation, know what it feels like to fly in space. How was it to go from here to the moon, and then because the transportation was so quick from the moon base to Mars, what did that feel like on your body?
Well, I mean, the TR-3B ride, it has a pretty good gravity field, inertial damping field, so you don't feel much movement at all when you're flying in one of those things, and so that's a pretty smooth ride. The large transport ship, also an incredibly smooth ride as far as not really feeling much ups or downs. But going through the jump gate, you certainly have at least I do anyway, my sensation of disorientation, of physical disorientation going through jump gates is fairly the same every time. And I don't know that it's the same for everybody every time, but it's, you know, it always feels to me like being squished into a ball and spun down a tube, and then all of a sudden opened back up, you know, and popped out to normal all of a sudden, and it all happened so quick and instantaneously that it's incredibly disorientating to me. I suppose it became less discomforting and painful over time, and to me it's a little more painful and discomforting, but I've been told that has more to do with the way that it affects my inner ear, and that the way when you're passing through it, that it's affecting your inner ear has way more to do with the sort of spatial disorientation experience. That's not something that's actually physiologically happening. You're not actually being pushed into a little ball and then spun around, but that's what's happening because of the disorientation of going through a temporal spatial wormhole on your inner ear, et cetera, et cetera. And so some people have a very disorientating response to that. Some people have less so. I have a pretty disorientating response to that. And so I always feel like I'm spinning around, and then I just kind of like all of a sudden pop back out when you come out the other side. So going through a wormhole in a large ship felt not much different, other than that I could still, you know, my hands were still attached to my seat or lounge, whatever it was, you know, lounge seat, kind of a sort of classic astronaut lounge chair. I could still feel my hand and my body attached to that, which is a little different than when you're walking through a jump gate. You feel a little more freeform because you're just stepping through. So in some ways that felt a little more stabilizing, because I could still feel that I was holding on to something, that I was attached to something, but I still, you know, lost my ability to sort of sustain vision, and had a visual and physical sense of vertigo or disorientation before it stopped again, and I could open my eyes or see again, which is you come out of the field, I guess. So it was a little different in a ship, that's for sure. Less disorientating, but it was still weird.
So you walk down the plank, you realize they say, "Welcome to Mars." Do they, I'm not saying they put a lei around your neck or anything like that, like they do in Hawaii, but you walk down the plank in military march. You get your first...
No, it's the opposite. It's the opposite of here's a lei on your neck, welcome to Hawaii. It's like, go, 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 move, 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 go, go, go. So, yeah, you're being rushed off that transport pretty quickly.
What does the air taste like or feel like?
Thin, cool, and there is a thick iron oxide just everywhere, so it smells rusty. There's a rust kind of smell.
So when you land there and you're being rushed off the plane and you're getting, obviously you have to now get oriented to your own surroundings because they got to make sure that none of you are going to go absolutely crazy by trying to figure out what's gone on. When you are looking around you and you are seeing the base and you are seeing the mountains and everything, what are you looking at?
Well, mostly for what we were seeing, I would say down. I wouldn't call it a crater so much as a canyon, or maybe even an artificially dug out canyon of some type. So mostly we were looking at a high rock wall going up around us, lots of tarmac, some buildings and structures around that tarmac, on the tarmac, and then a lot of sort of building structures and doorways that were going into solid rock all the way around. So this was obviously a very large landing port where things landed down in sort of the middle of this, landing bay. It had a very high rock wall and then all sorts of things that, people going, disembarking in and out of various buildings and structures around that, so who knows exactly where. We were basically disembarked from that vehicle and embarked onto other shuttle vehicles and then sent off to our location. So I have no idea. We never went inside any of those buildings or structures. It was obviously a very, very large landing port.
What were those vehicles looking like? Because when I think about it, I don't believe they're going to be putting 747s or Janet jets heading to Area 51 out on the tarmac. Is it some sort of specialized space vehicle that nobody here on the planet has seen?
These were certainly vehicles that I'm not used to seeing down here. So the transport vehicle, that we landed in was large, like 6 stories high, and was several hundred feet wide. Had a very, very shiny chrome reflective surface on it. But as far as what was, on this landing field, there were some standard TR-3Bs. There were some larger cylindrical, tubular-shaped vehicles that were like our, human terrestrial vehicles, not extraterrestrial vehicles, but nothing that I was familiar with necessarily either in my line of work. And mostly a large layout of these smaller transports that were about the size of a school bus. Lots of those, and they were sort of gray, very dirty. They looked like maybe they were originally white when they came off the service line, but they were very dirty and gray and red and muddy colored, and so they'd seen a lot of use.
Was it a lot like Area 51 where employees who have embarked there say you can't look at anything, you can't stray your eyes, you must go to your certain path, you're not allowed to look down hallways or in other rooms? Was it like that there, or did you have the freedom to take it all in?
Oh, well, in the sense that we were being rushed very quickly from point A to point B, no. You did not have a lot of time to stand there and stare and gawk, but they weren't deliberately trying to conceal necessarily things from you. I think that they were more relying on the fact that you were going to get off that ship and get on a school bus-sized transport within the next 60 seconds and then be gone. So really whatever you saw was going to be fairly inconsequential.
I'm just trying to put this all into reality here and what it feels like and what it's like because, like I said, 99% of the people you talk to on a daily basis in a public forum, Randy, they have no conception of any of this, myself included. So trying to put this all together, and I'm looking, and I know we have veterans who listen to this show on a nightly basis. We're all excited to actually hear all about this. Let's talk about you as the soldier. So what was your main job? When you went through that first briefing, what was that like?
Well, yeah, the first briefing was, here's how the equipment is going to work. Here's the main equipment you're going to be using. Here's the power-assisted, body armor you're going to be using. Here's the sidearm you're going to be using. Here's the rifle you're going to be using. Here's the hand-to-hand weapon you're going to use. And here are the main things that you're going to be using those tools against and for, and here's some people to tell you about what you need to know about that. And, it was the basic introduction of the major officers of the division and what we were going to be using as far as our tools and who was going to tell us how to use them and what we were going to be doing with them. But it was just sort of basically a standard briefing, except it was, very unstandard, telling us that we were going to be wearing pretty high-tech equipment that was unfamiliar to me at that time. We had not been trained or tested in any kind of power-assisted body armor before, so that was new. And fighting actual extraterrestrial beings in those suits of armor, and that was new. And but we were essentially, like any military briefing, you're given it in a very calm, sterile kind of way, where there's charts and pointers, and someone points and tells you very calm how this is going to go. So you're being explained things that are not going to be calm at all in a very calm manner, which makes you sit there and go, okay, yeah, all right, I can deal with that. So you are processed through that briefing in a way that's like any military briefing. You have a calm, clear explanation by a bunch of calm, clear folks with charts and things that make it all seem very reasonable, and everyone can feel comfortable about it. And someone tells a few jokes, everyone laughs, everyone feels comfortable and can slap each other on the back like it's going to be okay. And, you want to keep morale up, so you want to make it a positive conversation as you can. But it was a realistic conversation about what we were going to be doing, tools we were going to be using, and who we were going to be using them against. And just in such a matter-of-fact way that, certainly there was some, rumblings and oohs and ahs as we were being explained to things, but, it was always with a, calm down, we've been doing this for a while, so it's no big deal, and, lots of toning down of the excitement, and so forth, trying to normalize everybody pretty quickly.
What was the body armor like, number one, and number two, what kind of weaponry were you using? Because I'm pretty sure you weren't using sharp, pointy sticks.
No, not for the most part. No, the Archer series, full-body, power-assisted body armor was what we were using, and the Tycho series, Gauss rifle or, railgun, magnetically propelled rifle was what we were using. And then we had a personal sidearm, called a personal utility tool, or called a putter, which was a really heavy, vicious sort of handheld weapon that had pointy, spiky things on different ends and kind of an inverse guillotine blade, so that when you grabbed it really firmly and sliced across in front of you, you could just about take somebody's head off with it. It was a pretty vicious little tool. And in and out of those tools, we were given a lot of other tools to experiment with. So we had some, interesting grenades, infrared grenades that you could throw up into the air, and they would find targets that were non-friendly targets and then direct themselves down at them. That was kind of fun. We had some shoulder-mounted rocket launcher for a while, but that didn't go over necessarily very well because the reptoids, the indigenous reptiles, were very psionic, actually, and they had the ability to psionically detonate them. And so after we had enough people getting their heads blown off, we stopped using those, discontinued those. Sometimes also we would get equipment that just didn't work very well. It was a fail. For different reasons, people discontinue or don't want us to test it anymore, consider we don't need to test it anymore. So most of what we were doing was, as I have found out over time, was testing equipment. So it explains why we were getting new equipment and changes and upgrades in equipment fairly constantly.
I think it's very interesting because it sounds so video game-ish, and it reminds me a lot of the old video game Doom when it first came out. And when you were being tested with this new technology in regards to weaponry, were you shooting conventional type bullets? What were you shooting at them?
Oh no, yeah. The Gauss rifle is a magnetically propelled rifle, and so you're basically. I guess let me explain for you. I guess people don't know what a Gauss rifle or railgun is. It's a series of magnets underneath your barrel, essentially. And so by turning those electromagnets, by turning them on and off in series, so that the very, very one down at the base of your barrel is on first, and then you turn that one off, and then turn the next magnet on, and then turn that one off as you turn the next magnet on. You do that so quickly within, milliseconds, it grabs the metal projectile and sings it down that rail and flies it out the barrel incredibly straight, incredibly fast, incredibly smooth, without a chemical explosion, which means you don't have kick and you don't have heat like you do with a chemically propelled bullet. So we did a couple of times experiment with energy weaponry, directed plasma weaponry, etc., but I will have to say that we tended to favor projectile weapons. A weapon, a rifle that shot out a little metal object is something that we tended to prefer on the battlefield as opposed to a directed energy weapon for whatever reason. And I would suggest that it was the most familiar to us as human beings who have spent more genetic memory and generations shooting each other with guns than we have anything else. So, it's just very familiar to us. And those are essentially... When I got there, we were using an 11 millimeter projectile, it wasn't much more than a ball, to be honest with you. And the way that they kind of were fed in, they were occasionally changed the fittings to change the sizes to try and make them more aerodynamic, less aerodynamic. But the thing was, if you really wanted them to feed fast, you needed to sort of make them as, smooth around as possible. The more complicated we got with sort of belt feeding, the more jams you had. If you had, jams were not fun. So it just ended up more often than not in the transition that you ended up with a round ball that was flying out very, very quickly. But with a non-chemical propelled weapon that's shooting very straight, very quick, you end up getting an incredibly accurate shot, it turns out, with a little round ball. Especially because you are able to get spin, and you are able to get rifling on it, and so you are able to get it very, very fast and very, very straight. We started with an 11 millimeter projectile, and by the third year I was there, maybe the fourth year, we had moved up to a 20 millimeter projectile. So we had gone for sizably larger projectile to try and bring very, very large reptiles with double circulatory systems and two hearts down faster, or not so going down so quickly with the 11 millimeter projectile.
Let me ask you this, because I got a lot of veterans listening to this show in the chat rooms. They were asking, what was your MOS?
Special Tactical Operations Division is a Mars Defense Force operation. So MOSs, I realize that everyone wants to know what a Marine Corps MOS is, but the United States Marine Corps Special Section does things a little bit differently. So when I was brought in as an augmented soldier, I was essentially just put in as infantry. But infantry becomes Special Tactical Operations or Special Tactical Infantry as the programs develop. So then that developed into something called Augmented Infantry, which then changed into something called Special Tactical Augmented Infantry. So a number of these names have changed even throughout the time that I have been in a soldier. So that's a hard question to answer because none of the things that we did were as standard to Marine Corps MOSs.
So when you...
So sorry for the sloppy answer to that question, but that's just the way it works out.
So when you went there and you realized that you were going up there for a reason, did you realize it was a militaristic type purpose, that it was you were going to be fighting extraterrestrial species, or did you think that maybe you were going up there to help colonize a planet?
Well, when I had a chance to sit down with a junior officer to go over my contract when I was on Lunar Operations Command right before we took off to Mars, that was certainly one of the questions that I had, and his job was to try and explain it to me in a minimalistic enough way to make sure that I initialed and signed everything that I needed to sign and initial. So his explanation, which, anyone, again, who's been in the military knows that recruiters, lie like rugs that get you to sign an initial so that you will just sign an initial. So I can't say how much he was telling me what he thought was the truth or how much he just wanted to tell me, the easy street answer so that I would sign. But my question was certainly like, well, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? And he was like, well, chances are you're going to end up on a very boring space station or a very boring base somewhere doing next to nothing for incredibly long amounts of time, and it will be very boring. And he suggested, or you may end up getting sent to one of our colonial stations. You may get sent to Mars. You may get sent somewhere farther out. Who knows? But chances are you're going to be somewhere very boring where there won't be much action at all, and that's probably going to be that. So it was whatever he knew or didn't know. It was very downplayed, whatever I was going to be, whatever he thought or didn't think or knew I was going to be doing. I don't know. He just wanted me to sign and not ask probably too many questions. So I was certainly given an impression at that time that I was going to go somewhere boring, but that was probably because it was his job to tell me that I was going somewhere boring.
How many people
so
are
I had
up
no
there?
idea.
How many people are up there, Randy?
Where? On Lunar Operations Command on the moon?
Both.
Or on Mars in the colonies?
Both.
Lunar Operations Command and is one base, is one area, and there's so many other operations and bases on the moon. I couldn't tell you what the total personnel is. There are a number of lunar colonies. I couldn't tell you what those personnel numbers are because they're not numbers that not all of those colonies are colonies that we're necessarily have shared intelligence with, so I couldn't tell you what their numbers are. Now, with the Mars colonies, there was a census that was going on earlier this year. And just as we were starting to get numbers for that census that were starting to come in at about 10 million, which was a pretty sizable number. That was more than what we thought. So, but not long after that, there was this huge explosion. There was some people were reporting some either a natural or unnatural disaster or explosion of some kind. Some people consider that it might have been, a huge earthquake or natural disaster or reactor explosion. And there was all this questions about what was happening. And it turned out that there was actually a bit of an uprising we're not exactly sure in which colony and or colonies because they're not all run by the same people. I mean, the ICC manages or sort of operates the colonies, but each individual colony, as it turns out, is run by a different group or organization. And it gets very complicated as we're getting more and more intelligence about this. But now, after that, now we realize there's a full uprising and a whole bunch of people died. Now those census numbers are off again, and now we have no idea. So we were at 10 million earlier this year, and now a bunch of people are dead, probably somewhere between 1.5 million and maybe 3 million people are dead. So we could be, now somewhere more close between 7 and 8.5 million, but we don't know. But then there's the fleet. I couldn't say, I don't know how many ships are in the fleet, and I don't know how many personnel per ship in the fleet, so I couldn't tell you exactly how many people are in the fleet either. And then we also have some extended colonies in other places in the solar system that I'm not privy to know exactly where those locations are. I couldn't give you those numbers. We have no less than 24 fully stationed bases, military stations, but they're not like engaged in like military operations like we were on Mars every day, so I couldn't tell you what those personnel, outfittings are. We have an extended fleet that is outside the solar system now, but I couldn't tell you how many ships or how many personnel that is. That's all such classified information that I couldn't even get it for you. Even if we had it, I couldn't get it for you.
Is there
But we're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of personnel.
That's amazing. How long? And do all these people know that they are there long term, or do they get to come home at certain points to check in with family and friends?
I'm sorry, let me go back and answer that question in the vague numbers that I can. We are talking about no less than hundreds and hundreds of thousands of military personnel and millions of civilians. So those are the numbers we're talking. I don't know specific numbers, but we are definitely talking millions of civilians and hundreds of thousands of military personnel.
Now, is that a worldwide or just American?
Oh, no, that's global. That mostly United Nations countries, members, United Nation member countries, because you kind of have to be in the club to join the group.
When you look through everything and you hear so many stories, whether it's Andrew Basiago saying he was a chrononaut and accusing Barack Obama, the president, of being a chrononaut as well, when you hear people like Alfred Labernaut-Weber talk about the exopolitics side of everything, are they telling the truth? And if so, how do we know?
Well, it's always hard to know what every person is telling for the truth. That's always a hard thing to do. I will say, I know Andy Basiago is a wonderful human being. I know that he has recollected his experiences, I think with an incredible amount of accuracy to the best of his ability, and I think that's a lot. That's significant. I am to understand that, in fact, Barack Obama was also a member of the program. There's really not much more I can say beyond that, other than that we also are to understand that he was in the program. Alfred has a lot of opinions about things and reports on a lot of things that I'm not necessarily going to agree with, but his job as a researcher and or a presenter of alternative media information, it's his choice to do, however he wants to do that. But if someone is an actual experiencer and has some actual experiences, and I have a chance to sort of, hear what they're doing and listen to their briefing and ask my people if we need additional information on that, I can certainly double check all of that if I need to about someone or something specific, but, where it's relevant to my job. But I've also been told it's not our policy for me to go around pointing fingers at people and saying, you're not telling the truth and you're not telling the truth, because I could just spend all day doing that. So I certainly don't want to bother going around and pointing fingers at people. But I think people have to kind of stand on their own 2 feet on that one. I think Andy certainly does. So.
Well, he hasn't been disbarred from the Washington State Bar Association yet.
Absolutely. And I've said this to people who think that I'm making up stories, that if you think that the Marine Corps and the United States military thinks that people who impersonate officers is hilarious, and that I would continue to be doing this if I were impersonating an officer, you just got to be kidding yourself. So for the exact same reason that, I am not in handcuffs and he is not disbarred, are why we are not liars, because if we were telling mistruths, we would be liable for, being in breach of serious conduct code, as lawyers and military officers who are held accountable to a much higher standard than regular civilians.
Silly question it might be, but I think it's relevant. Do you know how old you are?
Yeah, about 80 years chronologically.
Yeah.
That's training periods, service period, altogether, it comes out to about 80 years old.
So what year were you born?
1970. So quantum dilation is, packing all that extra time in there is how you end up with 80 years, but,
So in relative human terms, you're 46.
Correct.
So
The body I am in at the moment certainly has all the physiological properties of one being 46, because the body that I'm in was put back into a same age body when I was brought back to 17, so I was put back into a 17-year-old clone body, and that body has been allowed to age, progress normally, so certainly I would appear to be in the same physiological age body that my chronological age would appear to be. So yeah, I get to be basically an 80-year-old man in a 46-year-old body at times.
we are talking with Randy Cramer tonight on Spaced Out Radio. We are talking Mars. We've been there a while. There's millions of people on Mars. We're going to get more into this story with Randy, his experiences, and what it's like to look an alien face-to-face in combat. We all want to know, and we're going to get into more of the political side of it as well. Randy Cramer is going to be here for the full 3 hours tonight. We appreciate Capt Kaye taking the time. And, hey, we made it through an hour, Randy. We made it through an hour. We've broken our record here with you.
Woohoo!
Exactly. I'm looking for the tinsel and everything to be falling down, and I'm going to go put a party hat on here during the break. So I appreciate y'all listening in, and I know this is a controversial topic. Randy knows it's a controversial topic, but we're going to get more into this as the night goes on. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio. We'll be right back after this.
Looking for news beyond the mainstream news? Head to spacedoutradio.com and check out the SOR Spacewire. This is Spaced Out Radio's Eric Markham, News Director for the SOR Spacewire. Daily, I will bring you intriguing stories and outlandish reports from what's going on around the world. UFO sightings, paranormal activity, conspiracies, alternative health, and so much more. And if you have news, email me at news@spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there. I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with U4Cop. On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com.
Have you had an experience you can't explain? Had a run-in with ghosts, maybe Bigfoot, or seen lights in the sky? Hi, I'm Mike Schmidt from the SOR Sightlines. I'm here to investigate your sighting. Head to spacedoutradio.com and fill out a report on the Sightlines. All your information is 100% confidential, and I will help you figure out what you've been seeing. File your report, and let's find out the answers together.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
From British Columbia to Northern California, Pacific North Weird has Cascadia covered. Check out our feature videos at spacedoutradio.com, where I, Vincent Zunza, and my super sleuth partner Alexandra Sullivan track down the weird and strange stories from around the Pacific Northwest. from Bigfoot to Mel's Hole and everything in between. This is what makes life exciting. So why report the normal when we can report the Pacific North Weird right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Oh, there's only one way to rock. Loud and proud. In high definition. Radio 702 rocks. Las Vegas.
Have you ever had an extraterrestrial experience? One you just couldn't explain? Well, maybe I can help. Hello, I am Samantha Mullet. On the second Tuesday of each month, I will join Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio to bring a human aspect to ET contact. It's something I've lived with my entire life, and I'd love to help you understand. Let's share our experiences. The ET Experience, the second Tuesday of each month, only on Spaced Out Radio.
Hi there, this is Jolene with Rivulet Reiki and Readings, and I want you to relax. Let me help you chill out and get in touch with your body, mind, and soul. In this busy world, sometimes we need to let go, and this is where I can help. Visit my website, rivuletrr.wix.com/rivuletrr&r.
Every Saturday and Sunday night, as Dave Scott wanders aimlessly in the wilderness. You can come hang out with me, James Tyson, in Spaced Out Weekend. Starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, I'll take you along as we talk with some of the best experts in their fields. SpacedOutRadio.com is the place to find us. So sit down, relax, put your feet up. Enjoy the topics like the paranormal, supernatural, intuitiveness, and so much more. Hope to see you there.
Hi there, this is your psychic medium, Joanna, and I would love it if you would join us every other Sunday on Spaced Out Weekend. With host James Tyson, we'll bring you personal psychic messages on two mediums and a large. Questions about love, life, career changes. We would love it if you would come and join us live. Call in and listen in for the experience. Allow us to open the doors to your other side. Two mediums and a large, heard only on Spaced Out Weekend at spacedoutradio.com.
Would you like to become one of our space travelers? All you have to do is click on the Space Travelers icon at spacedoutradio.com. For only $5 a month, you can get access to some great prizes, as well as private monthly shows, newsletters, and a members-only section on our website. Become a space traveler today.
Do you have a topic or a guest that you'd like to hear on Spaced Out Radio? Let us know at spacedoutradio.com, where you can sign up to become a Space Traveler member today. Or you can find us on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and on our Facebook page, Spaced Out Radio Show. Welcome back to Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Good to have you along for the ride. Tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time, it's the monthly SOR Round Table. As we bring in a few guests, we get into some hot button topics in the month that was in the paranormal and in life in general. I'm sure it'll be a very interesting topic of conversation tomorrow night. We want to thank everyone listening in on the United Public Radio Network, live on 107.7 FM in New Orleans and 160 countries around the world. It's good to have you along for the ride. Thank you for making us part of your daytime, nighttime adventure. If you're listening in on Revolution Radio, it is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Do us a favor, visit freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Tryptophan is your password. Tryptophan. I've nailed them all this week. I'm so excited. Tryptophan is your password. If you're a space traveler, you know what to do with it. Keep it going as well. If you want to follow us on social media, you can do so on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like, Spaced Out Radio Show. On Instagram, I can be followed at Dave Scott SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn. Download our show on iTunes, and our website is spacedoutradio.com. While there, join the SOR Space Travelers Club. It's only $5 a month. You can read up on the SOR Space Wire. Catch my latest blog. Read up on Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal, the official music of this show. And, of course, if you've had a weird sighting that you can't explain, fill out an SOR Sightlines report. Mike Schmidt is waiting for your information. Tonight, we are looking way up in the skies to Mars. Randy Cramer, Capt Kaye, is our guest. He came out publicly about 10 years ago that he is an experiencer and his military service was stationed on Mars. Welcome back, Capt Kaye.
Well, thanks for having me, Dave.
I got a lot of questions from our audience. Do you mind if I fire you off a few?
Sure, go right ahead.
All right. This one comes from KJ. She is asking, when you mentioned that there is multi-countries up on Mars, stationed there, and a lot of UN countries, from approximately how many countries were soldiers and the civilians from?
That's a hard question to answer because it's changed over time. The participating countries that are allowed to participate in space program activities has changed. So I would say when I started my tour of duty that there were probably less than, the main countries probably were still the main sort of what used to be the G7 nations. And I would say now there are, I think we're up to maybe 14, 15 participating nations. It's still a pretty small number, but they have added a few.
Do the soldiers who are there, do you get to come home for leave? Or does your family even know that you're there? Do you have to waive your rights to seeing your family for a number of years for your tour?
Absolutely. For the contract, you certainly, you're waiving all rights to communicate, write back home, make phone calls, take leave or liberties. I can say that when I was an officer and a pilot on the Nautilus, that was a little different. We did have occasional stop-ins when, the ship had a layover at a station or something, and sometimes we would get shore leave. But, that was a little bit of an exception and a difference than when I was on the ground in the MDF, when it was like, no, you was just back to the base. And, I mean, the simulators were pretty cool as far as being able to feel completely immersed in an experience that was not like where you were. So, you could take a very realistic virtual experience, walk in the woods or walk on the beach as a recreational experience, part of your R&R time. So it believe it or not, it did make a difference, and it did feel like you got to get away even though we never actually got to go anywhere. So you did get the virtual sense of the feeling that you got to go somewhere and get away from your experience and your anxiety and your stress for the moment with a completely immersive virtual experience.
That sounds right out of the movie Avatar.
Sure. I mean, it's just, you basically have to wear this goofy hat and put on these goofy sort of oven mitt things so that you're in this kind of immersive simulator experience, which we mostly use for training, but also has a recreation purpose, so, or function, anyway.
We see a lot of people going missing, whether they're in the forest. David Paulides writes quite a bit on this, and he's had some very successful pieces of writing, and whether or not it's human contact that is causing people to just disappear or if it's extraterrestrial contact. Could this possibly explain where a lot of these missing people go?
Maybe some, but I would suggest that there are so many different places a missing person could end up. So, for instance, just the mass scale of people who do disappear do indicate that there are a number of programs that are harvesting off members of the population for one reason or another, as either as functional material, slave labor, or in some cases a more skilled or functional labor, or maybe for other purposes. There's a number of indicators that there are a list of things that could be the culprit for that. So as an investigator, I have certainly talked to a few people about these things, and the conclusion is not at this time that there's a single source, that you can pinpoint and say, oh, it looks like it's being done by this, covert military department or this extraterrestrial group, and that's not the case. So it still seems to be a broadening phenomenon, means that it's happening more and more. But as far as who and what exactly, I couldn't say, other than to say that as the technology becomes just more and more available to grab people, without a trace, well, people are just going to use it for whatever reasons they feel that they have justified to use that technology, just like every other technology.
Where do you get food and water from up there?
That's a good question. I know that a lot of the food, they grow some food, they produce some food, but I also know that some of it has to be brought in. Water, I'm not sure where all the water comes from, except that I now have gotten some more recent figures to suggest that they do not have enough natural water source to supply all of the personnel that are there. So there's a water shortage, and they're having to export or / import some water from somewhere else. But I can't say where, or whether it's coming from here or someplace closer. There may be actually a closer source of ice or water to Mars than us.
So apparently there is polar caps on Mars. You being there, were there polar ice caps there? And if so, was the water just not available for human consumption?
I think the answer is that it's essentially because of what happened with the atmosphere getting blown out. It's a dry desert planet. And so, yes, there's an ice cap at the north, but it's a much smaller ice cap than we have here. So it's a lot less ice. Where I was at, where we were stationed, was a northern area that I often like to refer to, sort of geographically speaking, as like Alaska. So, we were very high up north. It was very, very cold. We had very sort of, odd, longish, light, dark, weird seasons and so forth because we were up sort of that high north. It was very, very cold. And we definitely had a frozen season, a winter season where things were snowier and it would snow, sometimes on a fairly regular basis. Often light snow, not very thick snow, but again, because of the dry air. Anyone who's ever lived in Colorado knows how this is like. Can drop a dusting of snow, half an inch on the ground at 7 a.m. and be evaporated off the ground by 11 a.m. So same thing can happen there. And there was a spring thaw, and there were small springs / tributaries, streams and so forth of running water that we would sometimes find. And it was certainly consumable. Sometimes it was not too cold, and we could, lift our visors up or pull our helmets off and, drink it and taste it. It tasted just fine. It was, again, very sort of had a rusty taste, a metallic taste often because of the iron oxide and everything. It was like very irony water, very mineralized water, but it tasted fine. But from what we understand, there's just not enough of it occurring in a natural or easily accessible state for the numbers of people that are there now. So they're having some problem getting enough water to the millions of people that they need to get water to. I don't know necessarily beyond that what they're doing, other than that mining operations is one of the serious aspects of mining operations is attempting to find underground water sources.
So there is a healthy supply of everything that is going on that we would need for human existence.
Absolutely, yeah. But again, they don't have enough, so they're definitely still having to import stuff from somewhere else. But again, I'm not sure where all of it's coming from. But they are producing as much as they can, or trying to produce as much as they can to be self-sufficient. That's for sure.
So when you get there and you start getting comfortable in the zones and you get introduced to alien species, were there alien species intermingling with the human species as well, or were you segregated from any type of benevolent ET being?
Well, we're a military unit of human Earth soldiers exclusively engaging with just ourselves and our chain of command, as far as you're talking about who we hung out with. So there was no socialization at that level with other extraterrestrials. We pretty much our first contact with other extraterrestrials was on the battlefield. I have mentioned a few times about when I was on the Nautilus and I was a pilot, and I got some very, very fortunate experiences being able to go to the Intergalactic Space Station for diplomatic missions, not because I was important, but because they needed someone who was infantry capable, which, because we're humans, we like to have a just-in-case guy, even though we never needed a just-in-case guy. So, but that was an experience of getting to sort of sit at the table and meet a lot of different extraterrestrials, but that was not something that anybody normally got to do at all. That was a very special kind of thing that I was asked to do on occasion when other senior officers were going to do that and they wanted me to come along. So, but that was not part of the normal experience of anyone else's experience at all. It was a very, very special privileged duty assignment that I felt super, super, super special and privileged to be able to go on, believe me.
Tell us about the first time you were told your orders that you were going out into a combat situation against extraterrestrials.
Well, we'd certainly been training for it, and I'd certainly been told that that was what was coming. So again, contextually, it was not a surprise, but being that it was still the first experience and the first time, I was nervous and not sure if I was ready for it, and mostly just kept trying to mentally go over my equipment protocols so that I didn't, screw up my equipment or hurt myself or hurt somebody else on my own team. So I mostly just tried to remind myself of what my sort of linear functions were going to be, and then when we got out on the field, and then that was also when I got my first shot in the leg. Not shot, but I mean, there's a hypodermic injector in the leg, and before combat and during combat, you get this cocktail of drugs, performance drugs, shot into your leg, which is pretty intense. So, a lot of the anxiety and sort of concerns mentally that you're having start to disappear when the drug cocktail hits your brain. So you become very focused, very aggressive, and you do not give a flying fudge, to put it nicely. So you will just, shoot and kill things and, go, rah, all day long, basically, with the juice in your leg. So that's how that was the first time. Kind of a crazy experience.
So you head out to the battlefield. Is there an actual battlefield, or were you just on some sort of patrol to make sure these, I'm going to assume, reptilians or some sort of malevolent extraterrestrials would invade and try and get at you? Explain that experience, if you don't mind.
Sure. No, and they're on any typical battle of the day, if you're talking about any typical battle of the day, there are a number of circumstances that could be a variant there. I get what you're asking. So, but as for the first experience, that was essentially a experience where we were aware that there was a marching group moving towards us across the plateau, and we were choosing to meet them out at a location which I'm imagining senior officers, tried to pick geographically and so forth. And there, let's meet them and fight them there. Let that be our battlefield. So, whatever they picked, an area that they felt was the right amount of, up and down, high ground, low ground, et cetera, advantage or so forth, that, they were like, fine, meet them here. So we mustered and got on our smaller transports, and which we call bulldogs, and hustled out there, and then disembarked and lined up in very sort of traditional, old-school battlefield style that anyone who studied their military history, medieval history, or Civil War history, where you're sort of mustering into significant blocks, and sort of outlining your form on the battlefield and talking about sort of what the basic strategy of the movement of your group is going to be. But then when you actually get into engaging in, the fight itself, it gets a little less orderly. It gets a little more crazy and chaotic. So, we certainly had organized ourselves and were lined up and, observed our opponents coming in. And I certainly was looking at them for the first time through, my scope on my rifle, because I wanted to get a closer look. And as I'm looking through my scope and getting a closer look, that started to make me nervous for the first time, kind of seeing them up close as they were moving close. For some reason, there was a little bit of a moment of a reality check there, and I kind of went, oh, crap, and, I had the feeling of wanting to poop my pants, because it was just a little shocking to see a large group of, pretty fierce-looking extraterrestrial reptiles, and indigenous reptiles to this world anyway. And knowing, too, that in this case, it's not like we were home being invaded by someone else. We were on someone else's home, being the invader, really. And so it was a weird dynamic, as well as recognizing that not just that you're the invader on somebody else's planet, but that you're the super strong invader from a heavier gravity planet in power armor invader on their planet. That was a very weird role to feel like to be in, and to sometimes put my head around that, because there were times when we certainly would talk about it in the evenings, like, this would sure be different if we were back home on Earth doing this. Like, somehow why that would feel completely different than what we're doing now, being on their world, in their gravity, as sort of the outsider, and how that felt very, very different. But it was a bit frightening to see them for the first time, because they were a little scary looking. Not ugly scary, but just fierce and, intimidating scary, and seeing something like you've never seen in real life before, or something you'd only seen represented in a movie or a game or something, and all of a sudden you're looking at it and your brain has to actually go, yeah, we're looking at that for real. And all the mental and emotional adjustments you're trying to go through. And, most of the people who were there were veterans of this experience. There really were probably only about less than 20, maybe just over 20, 22 or 23 newbies, in the group that had gotten there that week that I was included of. And so everyone was pretty good about, patting you on the back and going, you'll do fine, you probably won't get killed your first time, out, and stuff like that, and they're razzing you, but also trying to sort of, let you know it's going to be fine, and not trying to make it, make you panic or anything. But again, once the drugs kick in and you're under orders to just, you're being directed through your earpiece by your commanders and where to go and what to do and so forth, it's very easy to know what the instruction is and what to do, and the drugs make you fight very strong and very fast, and you don't care. Do not care. So all the notions of all the emotions that you're worried about, the feelings and anxieties and all the stuff that you're feeling and thinking about before the drugs hit your system and you're fighting, they disappear. They're gone. When the drugs hit your system, you do not care anymore at that point. You just might.
When it comes down to the battle, and I think there's a good point here brought up by Eric, and he's saying that he's surprised that there is actual ground tactics going on, considering the high level of technology with space travel that would be out there. Wouldn't it make that type of fighting obsolete?
That's interesting, because that's what I would have thought too. When I got there, I was just as surprised at the incredible lack of air power as anybody else would be. And what I was informed of when I asked about that later is that we had an incredibly difficult time keeping our air power in the air, and that it turned out that the most effective tools that we could use that were the most effective consistently operational in that environment, in the sand and so forth, were the tools that we were using, which was powered armor, environment suits, and mostly magnetically propelled rifles. So I'm agreeing with that. It was just as surprising to me that we were essentially engaging in very classic ground military-style combat, because essentially air power was just not effective, because it was not able to be functional or utilized like you would think that it would be. So, and without going into a ton of detail about why that was, we had a number of obstacles that were making that very problematic for us. And our opponents also knew how to make our air power very, very ineffective. So anything that we had low and close was not effective at all. And the higher up things would get, the wonkier they would get, more electronic interference and so forth that we would have. So it really turned out that if you wanted to be the most effective power punch for your dollar per minute, guys in powered armor suits on the ground was it. And I agree that that's a surprising thing. It was surprising to me too, but that's how it turned out.
So when you first got your good look at these reptilians that were coming at you through your scope, what did they look like?
They were carrying weapons which were handmade and hand-forged. Some of them looked like they were forged, by a metalsmith that really knew what they were doing. So some of them, just like crude, banged out pieces of metal. Some of them looked like really advanced forged tools. That's all I could really say about some of them. Some of them also looked just savage. That's really the best word I can come up with. I mean, they were just vicious-looking, savage-looking weapons that you did not want to get hit with, and they were scary-looking. And unlike things that I've seen here, or that we tend to use on the battlefield, but someone also, I know Simon Parks once asked would you say they were the reptiles who used scimitars, and I would loosely answer that question and said yes, but not in any conventional way that anybody would probably think that that's the way that you would say, or what a scimitar is. But curved weapons is definitely a theme there, and curved sword-like weapons is definitely a theme there. But to say that they were just like, or really like the weapons that we would use, no, not. But again, similar but different, very savage and odd, hand-to-hand, vicious-looking weapons, sharp, well-forged. In some cases, made up of different bits or decorated with different bits of stone or shell. They would sometimes have armored plates or armor that was handmade. It looked like it was hand-woven out of something, interwoven, some fabric or leather that was interwoven with some kind of hard stone or shell, or in some cases what looked like a vitrified glass, which turned out to be very, very strong in battle. Not really sure what it was made of. It was strange. I mean, it was one of the stranger things that I had ever seen, because certainly if I was to look at an approaching force and try and compare them to anything that I understood in my own terrestrial military history, I was not looking at it. I was looking at something that defied explanation from the books, except that I was clearly being marched on in formation by warriors with handheld weapons. I could identify that much. I could say that much was familiar. And again, that's why I think, ground-based tactics were really what we had to use, because that's where they were making us fight. And we really didn't have much choice to fight our way. We pretty much had to fight their way. So,
but they didn't have any type of gun-type weapons.
The reptiles, the indigenous reptoids did not use them. They did not believe in them. They occasionally used spears or throwing weapons, had some stuff that they threw, throwing projectiles, missile weapons, but not any kind of like gun, projectile, beam weapon. No, they prefer a hand-to-hand, close-up fight.
So how far did you try and stay away from them when you were on deployment? Because obviously your weapons can fire further than what they could throw a spear.
Yeah, they can, but here turned out to be the interesting thing. The farther away they got, the harder it was to hit them. And this is something that we could determine in testing. So we could, go out and field test and fire off practice rounds at targets and, hit bullseyes all day long. Okay, it was not a problem. But firing at live reptilian targets, especially the reptilian targets, this was different than with the insectoid targets. Insectoid targets the problem is that they would just come in vast numbers. But with reptoid targets, you could fire projectiles at them and they would not go straight. So we noticed that in target practice, we would get perfectly straight shots. In combat, we would get wonky shots. And so I can say over time why that is the case. At the time, we didn't know why that was. I can say over time we learned, and I learned that they're deeply, powerfully psionic beings, and so they were using a certain amount of psionic shielding around their bodies to bend and curve the path of the bullets. And so if you wanted to hit them, you had to be up close. The farther away it was, the easier it was to bend off the path of a bullet. The closer you were, the harder it was. So if you wanted to hit them, you had to get close. So pretty much we had to get close. We didn't really have much of a choice. They forced us to engage close. So when I say they forced us to fight the way they wanted to fight, I mean it. I mean, it really wasn't about, us picking and choosing our tactics in the way that we wanted to fight. We had to adapt to the way they made us fight.
I would have never have thought that with the advanced technology that you were using.
Their advanced psionics was off the charts, and so they were picking the rules, and they were making the rules, and they were setting them. We didn't realize that at the time. That took some time for us to realize that, but yeah, they were seen as being primitive because they were fighting with hand-to-hand weapons and handmade armor and so forth, but yeah, no, they were powerfully psionic, and they were picking the rules by deciding what was going to work and what not was going to work and so forth.
So when you were in this hand-to-hand combat, did you get up close and personal with these reptoid beings? And if so, how traumatic was that in that first experience?
In the very first battle experience, I mean, I definitely got up close enough that I was shooting and engaging with reptiles that were within 6-7 feet of me. Sometimes were really close. I didn't actually have to wrestle or fight with anybody or kick anybody that day. I mean, I did kick somebody in the face, but I didn't necessarily have to. It was a choice. But no one necessarily got close enough that I had to, fight them hand-to-hand that day. It wasn't necessarily true after that. But first day they got close, but not close enough to have to wrestle with.
So, do they bleed like us? Do they die like us?
Absolutely. Absolutely they do. The difference with the reptiles is they have two hearts. They have a double circulatory system. They have what I would sort of call an interior-external circulatory system, meaning an interior system that is primary to the circulatory of the internal organs and an external system that is primary to limb function. So they do have the capability of maintaining blood pressure in both systems as long as one heart is going. So you do usually have to take out both hearts or shoot them a lot to get them to lose pressure and bleed out. It's really hard to deal with. It's one reason why we went to a larger projectile.
How many different alien species were on Mars?
Initially, the two indigenous species that we encountered and confronted were, an indigenous reptoid species and an indigenous insectoid species. Then, over time, we started to experience another contender on the battlefield, which turned out to be draconian invaders. And that became a whole other interesting experience when it was a four-way cluster fudge of, everybody kicking and screaming at each other.
That had to get entertaining at times.
It was bizarre.
Sorry for cutting you off. What would the Draconians want on the Mars?
I think they were seeing they thought there was an opportunity maybe for an invasion, and so they were sending drop ships with large contingents of battle forces to try and attack the insects, attack us, attack the reptoids, and so we were dealing with them individually, meaning depending on what day it was like, who we're going to deal with today? Is it going to be the natives, reptiles? Is it going to be the native insects, or is it going to be foreign reptiles or alien reptiles, what's it going to be today? It was becoming very confusing on just, who we're going to be fighting today.
Message from clan mother Karen. She says to tell you hello and kind regards.
Back at you, Karen.
Eric has a question for you. He is asking, while you were deployed on Mars, did any high-profile people ever visit, albeit politicians, famous people?
Not where we were. I mean, we were forward station Zebra. We were the most forward operating station. So no dignitaries came out, to us. That was way too far out.
But they have traveled there.
Yeah, to my knowledge, absolutely. Yeah, I can't say who, where, what, and when, but people go there. I've heard descriptions of Ares Primus, Ares Prime, it being quite resort-like, and that being the place where people would definitely go. And then how far out from there they would be allowed or permitted to go for safety reasons would be the question. But we would have been the most forward, the most unsafe place to bring a dignitary or a politician to. So that it would be totally out of the question.
Joe is asking, did all the battles take place on the planet, or were there also battles in other parts of the solar system?
All battles that we engaged in while I was in the NDF took place on the Martian surface, underneath the Martian surface, but did not take place off-planet.
So flying around is free reign.
Again, air power is very limited, and it has a lot more to do with the limitations of your opponents and what you can and cannot use. And they have to get a certain altitude before your air power that you have at a certain altitude can become really effective. The closer they get to the ground, the less effective your air power is.
Got you.
Which I know is not the same as it is here. I realize that, and I know that may be a hard thing to understand why that would be so different. But it really has everything to do with the opponents that you're shooting at and their ability to make that air power less effective. Here, our air power is just so overpowering and effective that we don't see it as being weak. But believe me, there are technologies that can make it very weak. And so in some cases, it's just not the all-powerful force that it is here. It's just not.
Were you ever able to ask questions there? Like, why are we here? What is our purpose as mankind being here right now?
I mean, I could. I mean, we certainly could ask those questions sitting around, the dinner table or hanging out in the barracks. We could ask those questions. As I got to know my commanding officer better, I certainly was allowed to ask those kind of questions, but he didn't necessarily have better answers than anybody else, other than to say, our purpose is a military purpose to defend the colonies and defend the people here, and that's what we do, and until, that mandate is changed, that's our job. So he was a pretty straightforward guy.
So
mostly it was, but to answer that question, mostly I was pretty clear that we were there to also test equipment because we just got new equipment all the time. So, we were testing stuff. That was clear.
Is the Martian moon Phobos actually an alien-created base? Because there's supposed to be a monolith on it?
Never been there, so I couldn't tell you. I don't know enough about that to answer that question, and I've never been there.
Are you able to say who your commanding officer was?
Yes, that is Colonel Jack Jameson, who I've mentioned before once or twice as a former commanding officer of mine, yes.
Randy? Are you still
there?
I'm
here.
Oh, okay. I'm curious in regards to the reptoids that were indigenous to Mars and the draconians that came in. Was there a big difference in between the two species?
Quite a bit, yeah, as far as appearance, quite a bit. The draconians are a lot more alligator or crocodile-like. They definitely have a longer snout. If you've seen Jupiter Ascending, they have these sort of winged, sort of snouty reptiles. That's more draconian-like than not draconian-like, I'll say that much. And the indigenous reptiles on Mars were definitely shorter, flatter snouts, and were colored differently. They were more like rock lizards, or more like evolved from rock lizards. So they just they weren't quite the same kind of dark, kind of hard, scaly kind of crocodile skin. They were more of a kind of a pleasant, sandy colored rock lizard colors, and they're again with that the snouty face is a very sort of intimidating reptile face. The sort of more rounded rock lizard snout that they had was actually pretty friendly and not unappealing to stand and stare at. You could sit there and stare and have a conversation with them and not feel like you're looking at something frightening.
So when you did battle, were you ever injured by one of their weapons?
Oh, yeah. I've had arms and legs taken right off with them. Oh, yeah. They're sharp in some cases. Way sharp. Turns out that they are able to actually forge some pretty interesting materials, so that in some cases they are actually hammering metal, but in some cases they're actually using sort of baked, fused rocks, crystals, things that form these incredibly hard textures that mixed with resins or something. I mean, it's very interesting. I've watched them make it. It's really trippy. But they're able to come up with some incredibly hard, resilient substances this way, using very, very organic tools and organic making tools. But it's not all just, forged metal or hammered metal smithing. Some of it's some really interesting sort of materials manufacturing, to be honest with you.
And how were they able to put your body back together? If you lost an arm or a leg, how were they able to put it right back together for you to have full use of it?
Well, they don't right away. I mean, you get patched up pretty quickly. I mean, so first thing that happens if you lose an arm or a leg is there's an auto tourniquet, in the arms and the legs and the shoulders and so forth, and the hips and the suit. So you have something that automatically, cinches off the bleeding, and there are medics that, pull you off the field pretty quickly, and you get put into a medical bulldog and taken back to the medical facility pretty quickly, and then you get patched up, which basically is a holographic regenerating medical bed system, which essentially projects a perfect holographic, three-dimensional holographic image of your body over your body. So it restores damaged tissue or tells damaged tissue to restore itself to perfect order. But it also has this sort of ability to fool your tissue. So if you had a limb blow off, the reason your limb doesn't keep growing is because your cells get to that air spot and go, oh, we have nothing to keep growing into, we have to stop here. If you fool your arm by telling it with a three-dimensional hologram, no, there's still arm here, keep growing, then it will fill all the way out to the fingertips. So you're partially telling that you're fooling it by telling it there's arm there so your cells will just keep growing, and you're partially telling it to be in the form of the perfect cell shape, not any damaged cell tissue shape. So pretty quickly your body starts to rebuild itself by a couple of extra technological mechanisms that you're sort of fooling it into thinking that it can just repair itself and grow out to the fingertips of your toes without any problem. And it still takes a while to grow stuff back, but I mean, the hand, can take a few hours. arm can take the better part of, half a day or so, or most of a day. A full leg can take, day and a half sometimes, but it really depends on how much is damaged. But, you can get most stuff put back together within a week. 5 days is usually about maximum, but there are some situations where it took longer. But there's most situations where 5 days is about the maximum to rebuild everything and get you cleared to go back out and be fit for duty.
So when you had soldiers die, were they buried on Mars, or were they brought back here and maybe some sort of military service for or were they repatriated is what I'm asking?
I have no idea. Once someone essentially died, or became what we would call unretrievable. So if you're mostly dead and they're able to retrieve, your consciousness, you're retrievable. If you're not retrievable, you're unretrievable. And so dead, real dead is unretrievable. And if someone was, dead for real, we never saw what happened after that. I mean, they were just gone. And we were certainly informed that they were gone. It wasn't like, just like, who, what do you mean? Johnson who? It wasn't like that. It was just, yeah, sorry, Johnson didn't make it. He was unretrievable. And, but move on. We have no idea what would happen after that. I would suggest, just based on the way I know the larger picture of it works, that if they can't send somebody back home, they're going to have to send something or someone back in their place. They're probably going to have to send a clone at least back in their place that might not be very suitable and might not be the same person and might not be very recognizable personality-wise to their family members, but or I don't know, maybe they're just family members wake up the next day and they're just gone. They're not there. I honestly don't know. That is definitely outside my area. Good question, though.
I thought so, too. KJ is asking about the Greys. Did you ever have any run-ins with any of the Greys?
The Zetas? Oh, sure. When I was a pilot on the Nautilus, we bombed the forward operating base on Ganymede. So, yeah, screw them.
They're not happy people? Or happy aliens?
No, not at all. We've pretty much evicted them from the solar system, so that they're not really a problem. But that's complicated. I mean, there's still people using essentially the Zeta clone drone, which is like this biological drone that looks like a Zeta, and still using them to make it look like the Greys are still active, but they're not. It's complicated.
Samantha Mowat, who is a regular on this show, she has just chimed in the chat room. She is asking, Randy, when a limb is regrown, does a limb return to optimum functioning state, or does it return precisely to the state prior to the injury?
That's a really good question. I would say that it actually returns to a more optimum state. So if you were having, I guess the way to put this is if I was having, problems with my thumb, my joint in my thumb, and then my arm got blown off, and then, my arm got rebuilt, pretty much my thumb would be fine. I would probably not have any joint problems anymore because I would have an arm that had been told to be as perfect as my genetic pattern knew how to make that arm. So, yeah, you actually get a slightly improved version. Good question.
So what kind of side effects do you have personally from this experience? Are your limbs okay? I mean, you say you feel like an 80-year-old man personally or internally in a 46-year-old man's body.
No, I think that I definitely have fibromyalgia, and I definitely think that probably a lot of that is the central nervous system trauma of just being damaged so many times. So even though my physical body doesn't necessarily have the damage, my central nervous system has the trauma of being punched and hit and blown apart, that many times still, and it causes me to experience some inflammation and some pain and overall fibromyalgia. I think is probably where that comes from, to be honest. So yeah, it's a painful side effect still. And I manage.
I have people asking, were you able to ever see the Mars face up close and personal?
No, was never there. I mean, I've seen some interesting things there as far as architecturally and buildings and so forth and structures, but no, never got to see the Mars face.
Well, that sucks. You go all that way and you miss out on the biggest portion of it.
I know, right?
Shame on you.
I didn't.
Shame on you about that. What about other archaeological sightings? What is there? If you could paint a picture for our audience. We got about 5.5 minutes before we got to go to break.
Okay, two of the probably most fascinating things that I would say that I have seen architecturally were coming up to what was clearly the remaining skeletal structure of the girders of a skyscraper in the ground. Halfway buried, 3/4 buried, 9/10 buried. Who knows how much it was buried underneath sand at that point. But clearly looking at, the rectangular frame of incredibly old, rusted, beams connecting what couldn't be anything other than the frame of a very, very, very old skyscraper. That was absolutely fascinating thing to see and to come across. Another time we came across a surface village completely abandoned, and I would say, hard to say, it looked like it had maybe been abandoned for years, decades maybe, but I don't know about longer than that. But you still had a building, a little hut stone constructed, carved stone hut, which had these swirly spiral patterns chipped into them all the way around, so it was sort of decorated that way. Internally, the internals of the buildings had like lined grooves up and down all the way around them, which, as someone who's installed tile once or twice, to me that looks like the kind of scoring that you would do on the inside of a hard wall to put tile on. So that makes me think that at some point these were little huts that actually were, tiled maybe quite nicely and maybe, looked nicer than they did. There were, remnants of, broken pottery and, shards of bits of glass and things. Looks like bowls. Walked into a pretty large, again, small building hut that had a big stone bowl in the middle of it. That the only thing I could think of it was, would be like as a bathtub for somebody to fully immerse or bathe in. It might have been for cooking or for some other purpose, but it looked like it had a hole in the bottom, like it maybe had a drain that went down to the bottom that was completely clogged with mud or something, but it didn't look like it had a flat, rounded bottom. So that was curious, but didn't see anything else that looked like internal pipes or running water. So, I don't know necessarily what to think of that, but it was a really interesting experience to see these little buildings peppered throughout, this little sort of bowl, architecture, sort of geographically a stone bowl. I don't know what else to call it. There was kind of like a horseshoe ridge that flattened out on one side to create mostly sort of this stone geographical bowl where these little buildings were sort of laid out in. And we ended just sort of on a patrol coming down that way. We had sent something moving. Our sensors had picked up something moving, an infrared signature that was moving around. By the time we came down there was nothing there, but came down to investigate and ended up looking at all these little buildings and structures. So those two incidents were probably two of the most amazing, just seeing random architecture that was obviously from someone else who had built it there a very long time ago. That was very interesting.
There is a theory out there, Randy, that there was a previous civilization on Mars and maybe it was destroyed by some sort of nuclear holocaust. Did you see any remnants of that or hear any stories like that to confirm or deny it?
we got to finally make friends with the indigenous reptiles. The story that they told us was that back when they were still fighting for, militaristic domination of their planet, that a weapon, not to be described in any detail, because they felt it was dangerous to describe such things in detail, but that a very, very dangerous weapon was deployed and blew out the entire atmosphere and nearly destroyed the entire planet, because basically once the atmosphere blew out, it created this pressure, massive pressure drop change, so that, the oceans boiled immediately, and the winds whipped up to about 800 miles an hour in about 30 minutes, and, trees were ripped up out of the ground, and every little animal and bug was ripped up out of the ground, and apparently as all this moisture and so forth is moving towards blowing out into space, and then all of this moisture and oxygen and ice moving back up to the stratosphere, and sort of gravity pulling and tugging on it, and a new stratosphere being created, but so much of the moisture and atmosphere being lost at that point and having to restabilize itself. But that the storm of wind of 800 mile an hour winds that were swirling around the planet that continued, that were started by that event, continued for 2.5 months or something like that, for months before it settled down and into just piles and piles of stuff. So it was crazy.
Randy, on that note, I'm going to cut you off here. We're going to continue that right after the break. Randy Cramer, Capt Kaye, Life on Mars, coming up hour number 3 right after this on Spaced Out Radio.
The SOR Sightlines is a place for you to find answers to your strange experiences. Hi there, this is Mike Schmidt. If you have had an encounter with ghosts, UFOs, Bigfoot, ETs, or anything else that doesn't make sense, head to spacedoutradio.com and file a Sightlines report. All information you give is 100% confidential, and I will personally help you find the answers you need. SOR Sightlines, your answers are a click away.
Greetings and salutations, space travelers, from the Chronicles of the Unknown team.
What is Chronicles of the Unknown? I keep hearing about this thing.
It's a new paranormal reality TV show based right here in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. Follow our team as we uncover claims of activity on the Caribou Gold Rush Trail. You can also follow us here every third Monday, where 2 members of our team will be available to answer your questions. We'll give you some equipment updates and some of our experiences on the road, right here on Spaced Out Radio.
Hi there, I'm Butch Witkowski, lead investigator with the UFOR On the final Monday of every month, you can listen to me and host Dave Scott on Spaced Out Radio's Strange Days. We're going to get to the heart of the matter when it comes to what's happening out there. People are seeing and experiencing things from ET contact to Bigfoot, and I want to hear about it. Your experiences are what we investigators need to help solve these unknown mysteries. So tune in at spacedoutradio.com to the final Monday of every month from Butch Witkowski's Strange Days.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. With their money-back guarantee and the many benefits, how can you afford not to get one? Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com for mind, body, and spirit, and expect a miracle.
This is your medium, Joanna, from Spaced Out Weekend, 2 mediums and a large. I would love it if you would come and join us with host James Tyson every other Sunday on Spaced Out Weekend. Together, we will take your calls and your questions live. Our goal is to provide you with a positive outlook on deep questions that you may have. Questions regarding love, relationships, money, or whatever else is on your mind. Come and check us out at spacedoutradio.com.
Have you checked out the SOR Spacewire at spacedoutradio.com yet? Every day we post the latest stories regarding the weird, strange, and completely unbelievable. From cryptid and UFO sightings to the conspiracy world, we tackle it all. Hi there, I'm Eric Markham, Spaced Out Radio's news director for the SOR Spacewire. And if you have a story, I want to hear it. Email me at news@spacedoutradio.com.
Patrolling the Pacific Northwest, we are always on the lookout for the strange and unassuming stories that real people are experiencing. Hi, I'm Vincent Zunza from Pacific North Weird. Me and Alexandra Sullivan have teamed to bring to you those odd stories that never seem to make it into the mainstream. Stories so weird that will leave you scratching your head wondering, is this real? It's as real as it gets with Pacific North Weird. You can watch our videos right here at spacedoutradio.com.
Become more intimate and interactive with Spaced Out Radio. Join our Space Travelers Club with your new membership. For $5 a month, we'll provide you with special access to the website, monthly prize draws from books to psychic readings, along with monthly newsletter, private interviews, and more. Sign up today to be part of Spaced Out Radio's experience.
Every month on Spaced Out Radio, we look into the deep and dark reports of cryptids roaming around the world with me, Rob Morphy, from Cryptopia.us. I would love it if you would join me and host Dave Scott as we delve into the most arcane stories and reports regarding creatures of the unknown. My job is to hunt down the details and bring the evidence forward to you. These aren't your regular Bigfoot stories I'm talking about either. You can find out more about crypto history at spacedoutradio.com.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories. Are you listening?
Strange creatures lurking in the night, the sounds of wood knocking in the forest, odd happenings right out of a fictional world. These are the reports I love. Hi there, this is author Ronald Murphy, and I would love it if you join me and Spaced Out Radio host Dave Scott the second Wednesday of every month on our journey into the unknown land of cryptozoology at spacedoutradio.com. From Mothman to Frogman and everything in between. Hey, they don't call me the crypto guru for nothing.
Did you know that Spaced Out Radio runs 7 days a week? Hi, it's James Tyson from Spaced Out Weekend. Every Saturday and Sunday night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, you can join me and my guests for some great chatter about what's going on out in the universe, or even in that dark part of the basement you really don't want to go back into. Well, let's find the answers to your experiences together. So come on up to Uncle Jimbo's cabin on the weekend. For more information, look us up at spacedoutradio.com.
Would you like to connect with us on Spaced Out Radio? Head to spacedoutradio.com to check out the latest shows, guests, and sponsors. And don't forget to sign up for the Space Travelers Club. You'll find all you need at spacedoutradio.com. Welcome back to the final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. Good to have you along for the ride. Tomorrow night on the show, we're getting into the SOR Roundtable. Starts at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time. I will be joined by some really cool friends and guests. You just bring the entertainment with your questions, and we'll get along just nicely. 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time, right here at the mighty spacedoutradio.com. If you're listening in on United Public Radio Network, daytime, nighttime, wherever you are in the 160 countries around the world, thank you for tuning us in, especially live on 107.7 FM in New Orleans. Revolution Radio is a donation station financed by you, the valued listener. Do us a favor. Visit freedomslips.com and donate today. Bill Cardwell has the password set for you SOR space travelers out there. Tryptophan is your password. Tryptophan. Very intriguing indeed. But use it wisely, space travelers. You know what to do with it. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can do so at Spaced Out Radio. Give our Facebook page a like. Spaced Out Radio Show on Instagram. I can be followed at Dave Scott, SOR. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio Show. And our website is spacedoutradio.com. You can also tune us in on TuneIn, download this show and others on iTunes as well. For the final time tonight, we introduce Randy Cramer. He's a former U.S. Marine, still a Marine of sorts, because once a Marine, always a Marine. Spent 17 of his 20 years in the service battling aliens on Mars. Welcome back, Captain Kaye.
Oh, thanks for having me. And I'll actually make a clarifying point there. United States Marine Corps Special Section officers get a life commission, so I'm actually a United States Marine Corps Special Section officer until the day I die.
Excellent. Excellent. And I'm going to blame me being in Canada for not knowing that. So I have an excuse of being an international unknown here. So forgive me for that.
Well, that's okay, and it's not everybody knows that, and it's a unique contract situation that we established and negotiated for different reasons. But yeah, we sort of made the decision-making process that we have the ability to keep our officers alive for as long as we need to, and we need them too much to let them retire. So once you become an officer, you get a commission for life, and you don't get to retire until you're dead.
Wow, incredible. Do you get a pension?
And
do you get a
given
pension?
that they can keep you alive for so long, that could be a very long time.
Absolutely. Do you get a pension for your service?
There's an arrangement for us to sort that out, but not in any kind of normal, typical way that would make me happy. But my Brigadier General and I have had many conversations about how that's supposed to sort itself out, and I'm confident that we do have a satisfactory arrangement where that will be sorted out.
Mm-hmm. Clan Mother Karen is asking, what is it you learned from Mars that you would say people should know and should change to raise their own personal frequency?
I know that some people think that by having some sort of apocalypse or end of the world, that's the end of things, and it's not in any way, shape, or form. So I can tell you from a planet of beings who had their planet nearly destroyed to within an inch and then have had to recover from that, you don't want to go down that road. You know, you do not want to go down the road of letting your planet be destroyed and then having to spend thousands and tens of thousands of years trying to fix it when you could have spent a few decades fixing it instead of letting it die the first time. So if there's anything, I think that there's a lesson in there. It's that you absolutely can stop the destruction that you're doing to your planet and fix it, or you cannot, like they did, and destroy it, and then you're still going to be there. Some of you may die, but guess what? The reincarnation cycle means that you're not leaving. So the reincarnation cycle being what it is, if we destroy our planet, the few survivors that are here will then just still be the cycle of recycling souls and survivors again. So we'll still be here. We still won't get to leave. We'll still have to be on our planet. It will just suck more. So if there's any lesson, the lesson is that you don't get away from it by just not taking responsibility from it and letting it blow up and letting it be someone else's problem. Like, you really got to take care of your planet because you're going to be stuck with it no matter what. I've seen other beings go through this, many thousands of years after the fact, going with so much regret, saying, wow, if we only had, learned then, we wouldn't have to be, going through what we're going through now. And it's a harsh lesson for them to have to go through. So they certainly don't want us to have to go through it. Other species who I know who have lost their planets don't want us to go through that either. So,
Everett is asking what type of governmental structure is on Mars.
That's complicated because certainly the insectoid species have their own sort of civil political infrastructure that's not like the civil political infrastructure of the reptoid species, which is not like the civil political infrastructure of the humans. So that's a tricky question, and I don't necessarily know enough to know about the colonies other than that it's a kind of a classic colonial system where the bankers and the money people, the investors, are essentially, run as the ICC, MCC, and the colonies themselves are operated as business states and have to do business with the business arm of the colonies in order to stay profitable and function, which means all of the business ordering and requisitioning and making sure that they're supplied with food and water and workers and so forth all has to be negotiated or contractually worked out to that. So I'm not actually sure, other than to say that it's a business relationship. The way we organize our structure, civil political structure there is like a business structure. It's colonial, which was a business structure. So, but that's a loaded question depending on who you're talking about.
I want to ask about NASA here for a few minutes, if you don't mind, because there's a couple things going on here. They've killed the shuttle program. We have to rely on the Russians now to get anything up to the International Space Station. Why do you think NASA took such drastic measures in their, I'm going to call it, dehancement of their shuttle program?
I know exactly why, and this was not because NASA wanted to do this. You got to understand that, first of all. This was never because NASA thought this was a great idea, and NASA said, "Hey, let's get rid of our shuttle program and hand it over to private industry to develop private rocket programs. Let's do that." No, that wasn't NASA's idea at all. That was a bureaucratic decision that was handed down and told to the people at NASA this is what's going to happen. So I can tell you there are plenty of engineers and scientists and administrators at NASA who are like, "What? You want to hand over a polished, experienced space program to inexperienced civilians who don't know what they're doing? Are you kidding me?" And so all I can say is there were many people who were very, very opposed to that in NASA. But the decision was made because some people just decided it was time to privatize, and it was time to get private industry into it, and that was just, at some point, that can was going to have to get kicked down the road, and they decided that that's how they wanted to do it. Now, I don't know that was the best choice. That's going to remain to be seen. We certainly are seeing, for instance, that Elon Musk, who's been trying to get rockets in the air, has been having some problems. A lot of stuff blowing up on the pad. But as we're learning from a report, an investigative report that was done by SpaceX, to wondering what was going on, they were tracing a number of these incidences back to a flashing light source on the building of a aerospace competitor. So it looks like that a competitor may have been using a beam weapon to sabotage their equipment for some reason, to blow their shit up. So that actually changes the equation, and it's wondering, well, who's competing with who there, or who's sabotaging that program for what reason? So it throws all kinds of questions into the mix, and it's going to remain to be seen whether that was really a good idea or not. But the plan or the hope by other bureaucrats or administrators outside of NASA, for the most part, wanted to privatize space and decided it was just time to go that route. Exactly why, for better or for worse, I can't say. We're hoping to make that work out, and I know some people who know Mr. Musk who think that he's a good guy and will do his very best to get affordable rockets. And to his credit, he has done some incredible things. They managed to get an unmanned rocket that can land itself on an unmanned floating pad in the ocean. That's amazing. If in case you haven't watched the videos of the failures, which are tragic, and then the success of them actually, reverse landing this freaking rocket booster onto this pad in the middle of the ocean, unmanned pad, it's absolutely incredible. So they're absolutely making the kind of strides that they need to make to show that they can reduce the cost to make it cost effective. So as far as being able to address the questions of space business and rocketry as a business, he's doing it. He's definitely approaching the questions. He's definitely achieving goals and making progress down the road of being able to have a cost-effective transportation rocket. So And if that happens, then we could be in a whole other situation where we're not asking the Soyuz, but we're actually, everyone's asking us to, shuttle stuff up again. So there is this transition period of us having to develop that technology, and we have private industry doing it, and they are doing it. So fingers crossed, is all I can really say, that it works out as well as, we hope it will.
Randy, I'm a little confused here, because why would we still need to use rockets if we have the ability to get to Mars via jump room?
Oh gosh, don't get me started on that. Okay, but I have to, right? So the technology, layers of technology forbiddenness, where you say you have to have the most amazing advanced access to jump gate technology because it's the most advanced transportation. Now, if you don't have access to jump gate technology, you might have access to various spaceship technology, TR-3B technology. You may be able to get a ride, or you may be able to requisition or purchase TR-3Bs from Northrop, and as part of your program, and so that that's your access to transportation. Or you may not have access to that, and then you're down another tier. And so it's these tiers of technological accessibility and what's allowed and what isn't, and these just massive ironclad gates that prevent that technology from going from one layer to the next. So it's a problem, and we believe that there's tools and methods that we're trying to do right now to circumvent some of that. That's all I can really say about that. But the answer is we don't. Why do we need rockets? We don't. But as long as the technology barriers are in place and they're insisting that we do, that the civilian level of transportation is rockets, then that's where we're at. And we're left perfecting rocket technology to a level that we never really had to perfect it to because we had better vehicles. But the truth is we can perfect rocket technology to a more precise level than we ever have and make it more effective. So it's entirely possible for, business sort of commercial space flight to create a cost-effective rocket system that could help the space program and commercial space program work along. I still, however, am majorly for, getting around that step and going to a commercial version of the TR-3B, which is a whole other conversation to have about that. But it's because, again, other people have decided that's where the tiers of technology and layers of separation and forbiddenness will be and will not be. And until that's different, it's just what we have to work with. It's the building blocks they're giving us to deal with.
And I think that sounds correct on the reason why they're doing that. But on the flip side, how are they keeping it quiet? How does the secret space program and all of this technology that seems literally thousands of years or hundreds of years ahead of where we are today, how do they have the ability to keep it so quiet? Because we do have some brilliant men, whether it's Richard Branson or Elon Musk, working on this. How do we keep it quiet?
Well, they don't, for starters, or certainly not as quiet as you think it is. So, good example, you can go to any number of search engines on the computer and type in TR-3B Northrop Grumman, and you will get a bunch of interesting stuff, including military trade journal sites talking about the new black manta as if it's this new thing that just came around the block or something, and we haven't been making it since 1967. And so there is actually conversation among the trade journals, among military people who are in industry people, about the new reconnaissance, craft and so forth. And so there is conversation that's been happening that's not so super secret, that is starting to leak that information in. And trade journals are this really interesting area for people who are in the military or who've been in military contracting and know what I'm talking about. I knew someone who was intermediary military between military contractors, and he would often have these military trade journals sitting on his desk, on his coffee table, and on his desk. And these are not classified documents. If you are in the business of being in the business of working with these people, you can get on the mailing list of these trade journals. I think even as a civilian, you can, if you know the names of these trade journals, you can track them down. You can get your name on the mailing list and get them sent to you. They're not classified documents, but they will have some of the latest military technology that's on the horizon, about to be released. You know, we're going to see this soon. It's all this very, very, very cutting edge. It's just coming around the corner stuff. Ooh, this is just coming off the drawing board. Ooh, this is going to be available soon. If you're in industry, you want to know about this. So those trade journals and websites and information are talking about it, have been talking about it. So it's not a secret. People are discussing it. They are talking about it. It's still just not a thing that Tom Brokaw talks about on the 6 o'clock news. I don't know. Is Tom Brokaw still on the news? I don't know. So there is levels of secrecy and levels of what people, and levels of deniability. That's sort of the more important thing. We have a ton of people who know stuff, a ton of people who've seen them. You better believe Elon Musk knows that there's a TR-3B and knows that the military has a magnetogravitic propulsion system. He'd be a moron if he didn't know that, and I know he's not a moron. So he knows as well as anybody else, though, that he has limitations that he has to work within. So he's doing that. So he's working within certain limitations, and not just working on rockets. He's doing some other pretty cool things. If you haven't seen his latest solar tiles thing, that the roofing tiles that are like these compacted solar electric panels, incredible. To be able to turn houses into complete solar generators, and then using the battery thing that he's got, save the power for later just by tiling the roofs with these things. Brilliant concept. So he's doing other things too that are taking that technology and information and trying to help. So I give the guy a pat on the back for doing what he can with the parameters they're letting him work with. And until that changes, or until we're able to shift that, which, not talking on the radio, but believe me, if I had the right people from Northrop and the FAA and a couple of senators in the room, we could talk about a reason why we want a commercial TR-3B, tomorrow. But I'm not going to try and sell that on the radio, but I could sell that to a room of guys that needed to understand why we needed to do that.
Do you think Ben Rich, before he died, the former president of Lockheed Skunk Works, was trying to hint out in a lot of his comments that this technology is real?
I don't know that there's a direct relationship between his death and it being unnatural, or that he was taken out. I can't confirm that's the case. I would suggest, though, that he was certainly trying to do a bit of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, as much as he could. And, whether that irritated someone enough to shut up and he didn't, and then, they had to, make it look like an accident or natural death or whatever, heart attack or whatever it was. I can't say that for sure. But I would say from some of the statements that he was making that, yeah, he was trying to give a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, yeah.
What about the Mars rovers? We see these images, and a lot of people say they have seen images of people or some sort of technology, bones and bone structure. Are the Mars rovers actually on Mars patrolling around, or are they elsewhere?
No, yeah, they're on Mars. I have actually seen a stack of images, stack of photos, and which I've shown a few of them to a few groups of people, and had some people spread them out all over the internet, which is not what I wanted to do, because we knew that there were images within these stacks of images that were not necessarily genuine images, and so we knew that it was not 100% stack, and therefore I was not going to release a stack that I knew that was not 100%. So, but some of the stuff has been released, and some people have talked about it, but I did get to see a whole series of images that were very clear on what was going on there. And so you've got the rovers very close to each other. In fact, a picture of one of the rovers taking a picture of one of the other rovers about 100 yards away. That was pretty funny. And then a picture of one of the rovers taking another picture down the hill of the facility where the technicians who were managing and taking care of, monitoring the rovers, or apparently work every day or work and live. And some pictures of technicians, standing near them and so forth. And but yeah, they're absolutely on Mars. There is a facility, but it's in a very closed off area that's not in any kind of random, where all kinds of random shit could be seen. It's all very deliberate. So even some of the weird things that they've seen, that the images they've brought back, it's all very, very deliberate. You got to keep that in mind, because there are guys, walking around and making sure that these rovers are where they want them to be and taking the figures they want them to be. It's a very deliberate process.
What about that person who is sitting on the rock?
I'm not sure which one you're talking about. We might have to be very, very specific, or show me the image. I'm not sure. There's a bunch of them.
There is a photo of, it looks like someone sitting on a rock with their arm resting on their knee.
I've seen so many images that do indeed look like, oh, wow, that does look like there's someone or something in that image. That does look like a groundhog or a squirrel. Or, I've looked at a lot of them and saying, oh, yeah, that does look like a skull. And, yeah, that does look like a piece of machinery. And that does look like a piece of a wheel off of something. So even I have looked at a bunch of them and seen things, and I'm just not sure without looking at the image, the one that you're talking about specifically, to comment. But I've seen them, and they're deliberate. So exactly how they're setting up the shots and why they want those shots set up that way, and what they're taking pictures of that are either real or theatrical, I can't really say. It's what they want people to see.
Got another question here from our audience for you in regards to being on Mars. Gloria would like to know, how many women are serving on Mars, and if so, are there births happening there?
The only way I can answer that question is that our personnel breakdown, men to women, was probably about somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 and a third to quarter. So men to women. So a larger contingent of men than women, but about that 2/3, third, 3/4, quarter. And no, as far as to pregnancies or births among soldiering women, where we were in our division, everybody was on birth control of some kind, or whatever they were. I wasn't a woman, so I'm not privy to exactly how that worked. The women indicated, and we certainly understood, that there was birth control being used, and no one ever got pregnant, and they were never worried about it. No one ever got pregnant. There were no babies. Not where we were. The colonies, I have no idea how they regulate that, or what the numbers are at all. I would only imagine, from what I understand, that there is no free birthing, even in the colonies. You don't get to just, let's have a baby. Like, you don't get to have a baby unless someone decides they get to sign the form and triplicate, and you get to have a baby.
Let's move on here, and we have a question from JD. She is asking, if there are people on Mars already, what explanation do they give for recruiting, for being the first Mars colonists? And, this triggered a memory that I had about Laura Eisenhower. They're taking elitists up there, are they not?
They have been. That is certainly a group of the people they have been taking. They've been taking an interesting sample of a lot of different groups of people for different purposes up there for decades. But there's certainly been a goal to bring certain elite groups and people that they consider to have elite genetics, which is a kind of a BS term, to be honest with you, because who's deciding whose genetics are elite, really? But there's certainly a desire by people to get prime genetics, and people who are considered to have prime genetics as part of their group or their sampling.
And getting to a question from Joe here. And Joe is asking, since you came back, Randy, Have you ever met any others that went through the same experience that you have? And are you in contact with any of your fellow Space Marines?
I have met a lot of people who have related a lot of different experiences to me relating to their own personal experiences on Mars. That has happened a lot since I have started talking about my experiences. And I've certainly had to glean from those ones that I don't necessarily think are genuine, or ones of which I would just have to tell someone, yeah, you need to go meditate some more on that and get way more clear on that before, we have a conversation about that. So there's, different ways I can respond to that depending on how much clarity of information someone is bringing to me or how much they really remember. I have, in fact, met someone here in my house, who came to my house here, who I had met on Mars. They did not serve in the same division that I did. They were an intelligence officer who served in another outfit, but who did come to my division on a regular basis and who I knew and we had a friendly relationship with. So when we connected again here, it was a very surreal experience, but believe me, we had shared memories and shared experiences to go over. Do you remember that time? Oh yeah, I remember that time. Da-da-da-da-da. Do you remember when this? Oh yeah, I remember that. And so, there was a very interesting, weekend of having conversations about shared experiences, but then also getting a much larger sort of feedback on what her other experiences were, which I certainly didn't know much about when we barely crossed paths when we were there, and she certainly only knew some of what my life and so forth was, and so we certainly had an interesting conversation about that. But, most of the soldiers I served with died, so there's really no one that I have met that served there since. And I've talked to other soldiers who served in other divisions and other locations, but again, it's an interesting sort of scatter of folks who have degrees of more solid memory at this stage in their remembrance than other people. But I've talked to a bunch of people. It's been a very interesting experience, the number of people that I've talked to, and each of them many of them working different jobs. So a lot of them not soldiers, which has been really the most interesting part, is talking to the other people of other jobs, learning what's, been going on. People have been working in farming and agriculture and so forth like that, ranching. So pig ranching, yeah, there's definitely making bacon on Mars.
Bill is asking, what are the chances of us non-military people ever being trained as support staff for future missions?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm glad you asked that. One of the rumors that we've been hearing on why they've internally been being more and more okay with trying to get information out about the secret space program is because of personnel shortages. And that eventually, one of the reasons why they have to tell the truth or some version of it is not just because, you have to, like we believe they do, but because they actually need more people. They actually have manpower shortages and need more personnel. And so there may come a time not too far from the future when we're closer to some admission about what's going on there, and they're going to need more people. And then there are absolutely going to be opportunities at that point for people to, stand in line and try and, get picked. Because believe me, I hear a lot of people ask that question. And the instant that they open up recruiting to the covert space program to either military or civilian personnel for any reason, the line will go around the block out the door. So a lot of people want to go. Believe me, a lot of people want to go.
A follow-up from Ron along the same theme, and I think this is a good question. He's asking, on Mars, how do Earth nations fight as one world order or individual? Like, we have so much trouble getting along here. How does everyone come together on Mars?
Oh, that's easy. because you're the Earth people on another foreign planet surrounded by other alien things that want to kill you. So believe me, the sense that you are all one and they are all not you is real black and white in that situation. You're not worried about distinctions of who's from what country or who might be slightly otherly shaded of their skin color when you've got reptiles and scalies and, insects and creepy crawlies trying to eat your face. That makes it real clear who the humans are and who they aren't, and who the Earthlings are and who they aren't. So a lot of the differences are only made evident when there isn't a more stark difference. So the only reason we really pick on ourselves so much is because there isn't something more hostile and more stark to deal with. So we could go back to the Ronald Reagan, like if only there was some common threat, if we had insects landing on Earth tomorrow, attacking people and eating their faces, believe me, everyone would come together and be like, stomp the bugs, stomp the bugs. I mean, that would be it would take 2 minutes for people to come together and be like, yeah, let's be all the humans against the bugs. That would not be hard at all. So it's really easy under those circumstances.
How does Earth remain safe from alien invasion?
We have an incredibly well-funded and well-manned fleet that patrols the solar system and keeps it very, very safe. The last 3-year, 2.5 to 3 years of my 20-year tour of duty, I was a pilot on the Nautilus in an air wing of fighters patrolling the solar system and keeping things out mostly. So if something was there that wasn't supposed to be there, we chased it away or shot at it, and we have an entire fleet that does that just keeps things out that aren't supposed to be out here and keeps us safe and protects our airspace. So we have a very well-organized, well-funded fleet at the moment that does a very good job of that.
What about the council that we hear so much about that is supposed to protect Earth as well? Are they in play?
Which one? I mean, there are a number of councils and organizations that participate in the larger social political organization and negotiation on what to do about planet Earth and the solar system and so forth. But, that continues to change over time, and you just have to be more specific on exactly who you mean, because there's a long list of people, councils, consortiums, and so forth that are all involved.
I guess the Andromeda Council is one?
Yeah, sure. The Andromedan Council is one, and they're a member of a larger body of the Intergalactic Council, and the Intergalactic Council is, a lot of other councils brought together. So it's, we have a lot of help. We have a lot of people negotiating and trying to help us sort out different things, but we've actually made quite a lot of progress as far as our own ability to manage space defense and our sort of social political negotiation with other species. We're getting pretty good at doing a lot of this stuff without the hand-holding that we needed 30 years ago. Let me just put it that way.
Politically, is every president of the United States in the know of this project, or is this way above presidential scale?
Neither, meaning that no, not every president gets briefed sufficiently, but also no, it's not necessarily so above presidential scale that they don't know anything. It really does depend. And so it really depends on the president and what information and access and clearance that they can get based on what job they may have had before. So there's a reason why Eisenhower, as a 5-star general, had probably one of the highest accesses clearance as a president, because as a former 5-star military general, he had an incredible amount of, access and a high level of security clearance as far as someone who could deal with that information because he was used to it as a general. There were certainly other presidents who were not felt that they would necessarily handle that information as well, so they were given limited amounts of information. The typical process became to get a good psychological profile of the president before you gave them any kind of a briefing. And then based on the psychological profile of the president would basically be on what you would tell them, what you wouldn't tell them. So Nixon, didn't know much. Kennedy knew a little bit more because he was a little more able to understand it. Nixon was a little more closed-minded, so he didn't tell him much. Ford was really not that bright, so there was really not much to tell him. His job was basically just to sort of clean up and sweep up and cover up shit. So there's definitely didn't want to tell him too much what was going on. Reagan was out of the loop, about as out of the loop as you could be because he was a puppetronic. And then, H.W. Bush, he was a CIA guy, so he certainly had quite a bit of information. Then you get Clinton coming in, and he didn't have as much. And then Bush's son comes in, who was an absolute idiot and was kept as out of the loop as possible. But then his whole administration was being run by Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney knew quite a bit. Dick Cheney has had his, arm up the butt of this to his elbow for decades. So, but exactly what he does and does or does not know is always hard to say. Sometimes I think some people suggest that he knows more or does more than he is or does, and at the same time I think he tries to make it look like maybe he as well. But it's hard to say without the real list of names of people who are responsible. And then certainly when you get up to Barack Obama, there's someone who, because he was in a previous classified program, he had a higher security clearance when he became president, so he had access to information that presidents before him didn't have. So it totally depends on the president. Turns out it's not dependent on you just being president at all. It depends on what you were before you were president, and what your psychological profile as president determines that they can tell you.
So as someone like Eisenhower, because he was a 5-star general, do you buy into the theory that he actually made the trade technology for extraterrestrial or for human study?
Oh, no, I can tell you that wasn't his decision-making process at all. That was Truman's. That was Truman's decision. That wasn't Eisenhower's decision. Eisenhower was all about trying to establish some other protocols and some other decisions, and essentially because once he found out what Truman did and was trying to figure out how in the world he was going to deal with it or respond to it, he really realized that the only option was a long-term plan. There was really nothing he could do in a 4 or 8 year, even in an 8-year presidency. He was going to have to come up with something that was going to have a much longer term strategy to deal with this than his presidency.
So, do we have any further information on what that legacy of his needs for the secret space program were?
Oh, yeah. He signed the United States Marine Corps Special Section Special Code into law. So he created the United States Marine Corps Special Section. Thank you very much. So, yeah, without him, there would be no us. And because of him, there is us. And because of there is us, there is hope.
So if it isn't such a political battleground anymore about learning about this secret space program or what it entails, is it just written off in a budget? Like, how do they deal with this? How do they get the funding for this?
A lot of different sources, as it turns out. So, we're funneling money in so many different directions that there's just a ton of different sources. We know that there's a certain amount that's been coming out of the black budget for decades. We know that the General Accounting Office has determined, at least within the last decade, that just $1 trillion a year or so goes missing, just is somehow being funneled off and siphoned off and just disappears. But that's not through the black budget. That's through some other mysterious means of skimming or stealing from the budget that they're not exactly able to determine. Excuse me. We know that there's a ton of other illegal drug activity, arms dealing activity, etc., engaged in the CIA is used to funnel that money, trillions of dollars a year. If you add up cocaine and heroin, trade together, whatever, it's some crazy number of 9, 10, 12, $15 trillion a year, something crazy like that. you start breaking down where all these different sources of family money come from, big family money, especially now that we're seeing through some classified documents what the actual financial wealth of families like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers are, but they may actually be closer to the mid-high 200 trillions. So the Rockefellers' actual family assets might be closer to $250 trillion. Rothschild's family assets may actually be closer to $300 trillion. That means that some of that family money is some of the money that's been invested and spent and regurgitated out of the colonies. That may be something where they're making some of that money, but that also means where some of that money is going as an investment, and then they're seeing payoff out of that back. So it's coming from a lot of different directions and ending up in obviously their pockets because, somehow they're worth hundreds and hundreds of trillions of dollars, and that money came from somewhere.
So now that you're on Earth, and you've been on Earth for a number of years now, coming up a decade, what has been the hardest part to transition back to civilian life in regards to this?
Just that civilian life. The notion that, every day that I get up, my life isn't ordered by a military structure, and that I don't have a group of people around me every day that I know that I can absolutely count upon 100% be there for me. That was what it was like. That was the nice part, is that I did know that the people around me 24/7, 365 were absolutely 100% dependable, and that I absolutely knew that they were going to watch my back and let me know if, I was going to get hit on the head by an anvil and not just, laugh about it. But these were people who were going to watch my back and look after me because I would do the same for them. And just returning to, a civilian life where, you're supposed to go out and get a job and prove to people that you have some other value, and trying to explain to people on paper how you're supposed to be of value in a way that seems so completely bizarre and abstract compared to the way that I lived my entire life, as it seems like my military career. It's just this bizarre, black and white difference that it makes me feel like if there's this absolute way of me looking at the way people live in the world and looking at how the way we run capitalism, and I want to specify that to say that there are other worlds in the galaxy that can run monetary systems better than what we're doing. So the way we run capitalism is a nightmare. And the way we expect people to manage themselves and live in it is a nightmare. And I can say that just from coming from a system where I lived my entire life, where it was organized in a way that you wanted people to be organized because you didn't want them to be stressed out and controllable. You wanted them to be highly functional. Versus a system where you are deliberately making people so stressed and anxious so that you can control them because you don't want them to be highly functional. And that example is so stark, coming from one environment to the other, that I cannot imagine how we're going to continue to live this form of capitalism in the way that we do without absolutely turning it upside down, which is, I think, is sort of what we're in the middle of, is turning that upside down because people are finding it absolutely intolerable. And I can see why, because it's just not normal. Normal would be a system in where you want everyone to succeed because that's actually better for everyone. But in a system where you don't want your people to succeed, you want them instead to be competitive, and you want to instead use social Darwinism to, have your people essentially kill each other for food, that's psychotic. That's not social at all. That's psychotic. And so if there's anything that has been the most stark, hard thing to deal with, it's coming from an orderly social system which, people, I can say is as horribly and traumatic as going to, combat, a couple times a week was, at least I lived in a socially orderly system in which everybody was basically honest with each other and could basically rely upon and trust one another. As opposed to the competitive way that we run capitalism, the hyper-competitive way that we run capitalism, which is basically insisting that people eat their own, which is incredibly unhealthy. So I think maybe that was the hardest part, going from what was essentially a healthy environment as far as how you engaged with each other in a social structure that was a healthy engagement, and then going to an environment where you're trying to tell people that the way they're supposed to live and is normal is the most emotionally, mentally, dysfunctionally unhealthy thing that you could tell them to do. That blows my mind. That just stark example is probably one of the most difficult things to deal with. It just continues to blow my mind, and I continue to have a hard time in understanding it. It makes no sense to me.
So since you come back, do you find yourself more into the political game now, trying to figure out the realities of this life comparatively to the simplicity of the politics and the rule up in Mars?
Absolutely. No, if there's anything that it has made me do, it is understand that the solution comes from involvement in politics. And as much as coming after this most horrific political experience of the most horrific presidential election we've ever had in this country, I will still stand tall as a patriot and say that we need to be more active in our political system. If nothing, this teaches us, and I know I'm talking to a bunch, mostly Canadians at this point, as Americans, it teaches us...
Most Americans, actually.
Am I? Really? Okay, fantastic. Then this is what this teaches us as Americans, if nothing else, that we still need more participation, right? We still need more participation in the system, because the things that went right with this election were because people participated, and things that went wrong with this election because not enough people participated. So we did have more participation in the primary than ever before. And then as it got towards the end, because so many people come satisfied and disenfranchised with their choices, ended up with actually very low voter turnout on both sides, on both Republican and Democratic turnout. So a lot of people were thinking both these people were going to get a huge number of votes, and when it really came down to the general election, they didn't. A lot of people didn't even show up for both of them, but Hillary mostly lost because of the number of people that she hemorrhaged off her support, not necessarily the support that Donald Trump gained or that he won by. They're both detestable candidates that people hated them so much and really wanted someone better, but because the media crammed them down our throat, we felt like there was no other place. And I didn't vote for either one of them. I still wrote in Bernie Sanders. I voted my conscience. But I still think that this teaches us one thing, that all the things that went wrong because we still don't take our system of politics seriously enough. Because if we sit back and think that it's all being managed without us, and we think that it's all being conducted honestly and safely and securely without us, and we think that it's all being led in the right direction for the best of purposes without us, that's just not how it works. Democracy only works when we participate with it. And so only when participation is in the 70 and 80 percentiles and higher is when it works. As long as it's low, very powerful people can control it. And when that turnout of that participation is high, then we can actually get things that the people need, because there's more of them demanding the things that they need be fairly distributed across the social, political, economic lines of resource, which doesn't have to be anti-capitalism, as some people might think that that's sounding. It just has to be more balanced. We have allowed our capitalistic system to become near feudalistic, where we have allowed people at the top to accumulate wealth like feudal lords and treat people at the bottom like serfs, instead of what a real capitalistic market-based system would be, which is a lot more even, right? And so this is why when I say the capitalist system that we're using now, which is not a very fair, just capitalist system at all, and a true, fair capitalist system would just be a lot more even and a lot less of the big bumps that the system that we have is, because we have allowed it to be hyper competitive and allow the people at the top with the most wealth to dictate what's happening instead of the participation of the masses that would encourage and dictate things going a different way. So if anything, it has taught me that if people want a better world, the only way it's going to happen is when they participated and demanded, because until some more perfect system is invented, it's the only one we've got. There just isn't one. And so what's going to happen if we don't participate in our system is it will be overtaken by one of the inferior systems, like fascism, or totalitarian communism, like China sort of dealt with, or some other failed system, some other barbaric failed system. So we can either use the democratic republic systems that function, even though they function imperfectly, or we can go with one of the worst systems, right? And those are the choices. So people need to participate so we can have functional democratic republics, or they can continue to not participate and end up with disasters. And so that's where we're at. And I'll just say one last word on that, on politics. If anything else, I still think the lesson that we may learn from a President Trump are many, many things that maybe we don't need to learn as a people. So we were very concerned that an emboldened white supremacist movement would, start to surface, and it is. And maybe, just maybe, that's what needs to happen, because Americans need to see just how dangerous that movement is. Because I see many of my fellow Americans not recognizing the danger of the white supremacist movement. And I think maybe we needed to see that a little bit more on the spotlight to recognize how dangerous it is. And so maybe that'll end up being a good thing, that it is being spotlighted more. But, certainly an uprising of that kind is not a good thing. But, if it brings an attention that we then can approach and deal with it in a rational way like the Democratic Republic will, I guess that'll be a good thing. But it's certainly not a good thing to see sort of the insane neoconservative of white supremacist leaning that is people surrounding him are wanting to take this now. So anyway, I could go on about the analysis forever. I've been watching this thing with a microscope for 18 months now, and it's been driving me insane.
Randy, we only got a couple minutes left with you. That was a very quick 3 hours, my friend. Very quick 3 hours.
I can talk for days.
Well, so can I. I mean, that's the beauty of pure yapping. We're like poodles, man. When we start barking with that crosswind, that's a good 3 hours worth of barking right there. You know what I'm saying? One of the things I want to ask you before we have to cut on out of here is, do you regret what you've done? Do you regret giving up your life for this cause?
No, not for a second. There's just too many things that I would look at my life that I would never regret, that I would never want to go back on. And I feel like life is the buffet that you don't just get to decide that you want to eat the dessert. You have to eat everything. And so that includes all the dishes that you don't like too. You just have to take the whole thing. And so I can always look back and say, that was sucky, and that wasn't so fun. But way too many amazing experiences that make up my life that I would never trade for anything to make me not regret it. Plenty of instances and individual things that I may regret having occurred, but not the whole thing ever.
That's good to know, Randy. And as we start to close this out, how can people find out more information about you and what you're up to next in speaking engagements?
They can go to my website, which is earthcitizenconsulting.org. There's a link to my YouTube channel, which says interviews that I've done and so forth. I tend to try and keep some updated information on my website, but there's not a lot of information to update at the moment just because of some other case situation that I'm dealing with at the moment that's very, very important work that hopefully I'll get to report on next year sometime, which is just taking more time than speaking engagements or anything else. But we're hoping to get the psionics course out next year and so forth. And so there's stuff happening. People can extract there.
Awesome, my friend. Thank you so much for being on Spaced Out Radio tonight. Good to have you with us again, and we will do it again, Randy. Hey, we didn't get hacked. We made it.
Woo! How about that?
I know.
Thanks for having me, Dave. It was a pleasure.
No problem. Randy, hold on one second. I got to wrap this thing up. If you're listening on the Spaced Out Radio side, you hear Mr. Ron Bumblefoot Thal, formerly of Guns N' Roses. He rocks us in and out of every single show. He is the official sound of the mighty SOR. Tomorrow night, it's the final Friday of the month, SOR Roundtable time. Come join me and my friends. We're going to debate the paranormal through and through in the month that was. Hey, only 30 shopping days till Christmas. What are you getting me? I need to know. If you want to hear this show or others, go to our YouTube channel where our archives are stored, Spaced Out Radio Show. Tune us in on TuneIn, and you can download this show and others if you have an iTunes account. Good to have you along for the ride. We will talk to you in exactly 21 hours from now. Be real, be safe. And you know what I always say. Do us a favor. If you want to see us grow big, expand, tell a friend. We're all going to do it together. Have a good one, people. Let's rock it on out. Have a good one.
Don't make a mistake. We're watching. We watched you fall so